School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. Iran goes all out. They tired of playing. They threaten they will absolutely sink the U.S. aircraft carrier. Trump's on the ropes. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, there will be no deal. There will be only war. Let's get right into the content. Salute. There will be only war. Trump's making a terrible mistake. China will not let the U.S. get out of this unscathed. Trump went too far trying to close off the Chinese oil. They got to make it pay.
A tense new claim is raising alarms across the Middle East. Reports suggest Iran may have received advanced Chinese-made Dongfeng 17 missiles, potentially boosting its ability to counter U.S. forces. The DF-17 is a hypersonic-capable missile designed to evade modern missile defenses, making it one of the most sophisticated weapons in China's arsenal. Analysts say even the possibility of such transfers would dramatically change the strategic balance, turning Iran's deterrence into a far more formidable threat. While independent confirmation remains unclear, the allegation alone is fueling fears of a widening geopolitical confrontation. The Dongfeng 17 is built to deploy a hypersonic glide vehicle, a weapon capable of maneuvering unpredictably at extreme speeds, making interception difficult. Defense analysts have long warned that such systems are designed to defeat conventional missile shields and complicate U.S. naval and air operations. If Iran were to acquire even limited numbers, it could strengthen its anti-access strategy in the Gulf, potentially threatening U.S. bases, shipping lanes, and allied infrastructure. For Washington, the possibility of Chinese technology bolstering Tehran's arsenal would represent a serious escalation. These reports surface as U.S. officials acknowledge preparations for sustained military operations against Iran should President Donald Trump authorize an attack. Planning reportedly includes multiple strike waves, defensive responses to Iranian retaliation, and the possibility of prolonged confrontation. The Pentagon is already reinforcing its regional posture, signaling that Washington is preparing not just for a limited strike, but for a broader campaign if diplomacy collapses. President Trump says the deployment ensures the United States will be ready if we need it, even as talks with Iran continue. The buildup suggests Washington wants maximum leverage and the ability to strike rapidly if negotiations fail. Trump has gone further, openly suggesting that regime change in Iran would be the best thing that could happen. He says decades of negotiations have achieved little and warns that failure to reach a nuclear deal could bring consequences worse than last year's strikes. Tehran, meanwhile, has vowed to retaliate if attacked, meaning any conflict could escalate quickly into a regional war involving multiple fronts. If Chinese weapons are indeed flowing toward Iran, the confrontation would no longer be just a U.S.-Iran crisis. It would become part of the wider strategic rivalry between Washington and Beijing. Analysts warn that even indirect military cooperation could deepen divisions between global powers and complicate diplomatic efforts. Tonight, the combination of missile rumors, carrier deployments, and nuclear brinkmanship paints a stark picture. The Middle East is becoming the stage for a confrontation that may stretch far beyond the region itself.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update.
The U.S. president keeps saying our military is the strongest military in the world. The world's most powerful military can sometimes receive such a slap that it can no longer stay on its feet.
Are Iran's 3,000-kilometer range missiles now staring down at U.S. bases across the region after Supreme Leader Khamenei gave the green light for mass production? Is Iran building a missile wall so dense and so deep that it can taunt Trump's armada and challenge America's forward presence in the Gulf? Could the world's strongest military actually crumble under the weight of a sustained Iranian missile barrage launched from hardened mountain sites?
The U.S. president keeps saying our military is the strongest military in the world. The world's most powerful military can sometimes receive such a slap that it can no longer stay on its feet. They keep saying we have sent warships toward Iran. Okay, of course a warship is a dangerous device, but more dangerous than that is a weapon that can send that warship deep under the sea.
As Iran's missile stockpile reportedly surges past 2,000 in just months, is Khamenei roaring defiance while Washington scrambles to counter the threat? Can the Fatah II, traveling at acclaimed Mach 13, dodge every defense layer and devastate U.S. bases before interceptors even have time to lock on? Are Iran's 3,000-plus missiles now ready to sink carriers and cripple naval power in a Strait of Hormuz showdown that could reshape the balance of power? Under Iran's missile arsenal are short-range ballistic missiles. The Shahab-1 is reported to have a range of approximately 300 kilometers and can carry a payload between 770 and 1,000 kilograms, making it suitable for short-range tactical strikes. The Shahab-2 extends Iran's reach to roughly 500 kilometers with a payload capacity of around 700 kilograms, providing greater standoff capability than its predecessor. The Qiyam-1 missile is reported to have a range of approximately 700 to 800 kilometers and carries a payload of around 650 kilograms, offering improved range for regional targeting. The Fatah 110 family of missiles reportedly has a range of about 300 kilometers and carries a payload of approximately 450 kilograms, designed for precision tactical strikes. The Fatah 313 and Fatah Mobin variants extend the range to roughly 500 kilometers while carrying payloads between 350 and 450 kilograms, with enhanced accuracy features. The Zulfahar missile is reported to reach approximately 700 kilometers and can deliver payloads between 450 and 600 kilograms, bridging short and medium ranges. The Desfal missile reportedly has a range of around 1,000 kilometers and carries a payload between 450 and 600 kilograms, extending Iran's tactical strike envelope significantly. Iran's medium-range ballistic missiles include the Shahab-3 is one of Iran's foundational medium-range missiles, with a reported range between 800 and 1,000 kilometers, capable of reaching multiple regional capitals. The Garda 110 extends Iran's reach to approximately 1,600 kilometers with a payload of around 750 kilograms, representing a significant upgrade in strategic reach. The Emad-1 missile is reported to have a range of up to 2,000 kilometers and features a maneuverable re-entry vehicle designed for higher precision against defended targets. The Rezvan missile reportedly has a range of approximately 1,400 kilometers and is specifically designed for higher accuracy strikes against regional targets. The Khorramshahr family is reported to have ranges between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers, with payloads from 750 to 1,500 kilograms across multiple variants optimized for different warheads and accuracy levels. The Sejal missile is reported to have a range between 1,500 and 2,500 kilometers, making it one of Iran's longest-range solid-fuel missiles with strategic implications. The Hajj-Qassam missile reportedly has a range of approximately 1,400 kilometers and is a Fatah family derivative equipped with a heavier warhead for enhanced strike capability. The Kibar-Shikan missile is reported to reach about 1,450 kilometers and is specifically optimized to penetrate regional air defense systems with advanced maneuvering features. The Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 missiles reportedly have ranges between 1,400 and 1,500 kilometers and feature hypersonic-class maneuvering warheads that Iran claims can reach speeds exceeding Mach 13, as per reports.
With the negotiations with Iran, I am getting mixed messages. I'm sure you are as well. On one hand, we're hearing, yeah, things are going fine. Iran has said that the United States has softened on some of the positions. Yet then we hear that the U.S. is sending fighter jets to the Middle East. In fact, we just sent yesterday, well, really in the last 24 or 48 hours, 50 fighter jets have been moved to the Middle East. Meanwhile, we also have Iran doing military drills, live fire military drills in the Strait of Hormuz. They have now completed day 2 of its smart control of the Strait Hormuz drills, and they've shut down the Strait of Hormuz in order to do this. They also did this alongside Russia and China. They all joined in on these live fire drills in the Strait of Hormuz, and they're apparently prepared to close this down. That would be their big sort of ammunition if we were to wage war with Iran, is if they just cut off the Strait of Hormuz and cut off oil supplies. We would be hurting. They know this. This is what the IRGC commander said about closing the Strait of Hormuz. We did dub this using AI.
The decision concerning the potential closure of the vital Strait of Hormuz rests entirely with our revered and wise leaders. However, I personally, as a dedicated and obedient soldier of this proud and resilient nation, we are standing here fully prepared and absolutely ready to undertake and execute this action at any given moment our esteemed leaders issue the directive.
Okay, so they're ready. I mean, they're ready to just close down that strait and to inflict economic harm on the United States if it gets to it. So here we are sending 50 fighter jets. We've got a ton of aircraft carriers in the region, or at least a few. We've got, we're putting a lot of military assets toward the Middle East right now, getting ready for war, while we're sitting at the negotiation table. And Iran is saying, yeah, well, we've got some things that we can do as well. Ayatollah Khamenei says, he says that the U.S. he tweeted this out. I'm just going to read for you a couple of tweets that he released over the last day. And he says, the U.S. president keeps saying that they have the strongest military force in the world. The strongest military force in the world may at times be struck so hard that it cannot get up again. Okay. So he's preparing for war. He also goes on to say, the Americans say, let's negotiate over your nuclear energy. And the result of the negotiation is supposed to be that you do not have this energy. Right, which that has been what the U.S. has been trying to say is, we're going to negotiate your energy. You're not allowed to have it. That's the negotiation. That's it. And the Iranians say, yeah, right. So he says, if that's the case, there's no room for negotiation. But if negotiations are truly to take place, determining the outcome of the negotiations in advance is a wrong and foolish act. He goes on to say that they will sink an American aircraft carrier. He tweeted out, the Americans constantly say they've sent a warship toward Iran. Of course, a warship is a dangerous piece of military hardware. However, more dangerous than that warship is the weapon that can send that warship to the bottom of the sea. So, I mean, this is harsh talk. Are these negotiations going well or not? What is happening? Are we about to go to war with Iran? Is that what is happening here? Because that's what, certainly both sides are flexing their muscles right now. Certainly both sides are saying, yeah, we might be going to war. And guess what? We are totally and completely prepared. Iran's foreign minister at the Conference of Disarmament says that Israel has nuclear weapons, that they've attacked countries, that they have massacred people in Gaza, but Iran is supposedly the big threat to peace. Watch this.
While the United States and certain European countries turned a blind eye to the threats posed by the Israeli regime to international peace and security, including its nuclear weapons capabilities, they continue to portray Iran's peaceful nuclear program as a threat to international peace and security. The Israeli regime has been committing the most atrocities crimes for the past 8 decades with full impunity, unfortunately. In less than 2 years, it has attacked 7 countries in the region, while more than 70,000 people have been massacred in Gaza as part of its colonial genocide. There is no crime it has not committed and no red line it has not crossed. Mr. President, the United States and some European states persist in the imposition of unlawful sanctions, military threats, the engagement in force posturing, and the issuance of explicit references to the possible use of force by the United States. including significant military deployments in the region. Such actions constitute a continuing violation of the prohibition of the threat or use of force as enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, and must be brought to an immediate and unconditional end.
Also, the IRGC commander says that the United States is finished, that we go to war, we are finished. We did dub this also with AI. The last one, the one you just watched, is not dubbed, but this one we did dub it with AI. But listen to him.
Even if it brings us 12 aircraft carriers here, America won't be able to do a single damn thing. America has surely been defeated. America is incapable of any aggression. It must go and put its own house in order. It should go and deal with those military deployments it has within its own states.
How can our officials manage to make America despair?
America has now become truly desperate. Today, America is the absolute disgrace of the entire world. Its president is deeply embroiled in a massive corruption scandal. Its vital relationships with its most intimate and closest friends, like Europe, Canada, and others, are now on the very brink of war. America is completely and utterly...
I mean, he's not really wrong on that. We are embroiled in scandal. A lot of our allies, like Europe and Canada, they're not feeling like they're allies. I mean, it is kind of a mess, so he's not really very wrong on that. Okay, so if we go to war with Iran, what could potentially happen? Here we are, we're bringing all of our stuff to them, right? They've got their whole country over there, which is filled with weapons, and we're bringing weapons to them, and we think what is going to be the outcome of this, because it doesn't usually turn out well. John Kiriakou says, yeah, it could be even worse than that, because guess what? We got all these aircraft carriers and, but so what? They have hypersonic missiles. Here's what he says.
I was talking to Colonel Doug McGregor a few days ago about Iran's hypersonic missiles. And I said, Doug, I'm not a military guy. I don't know the details of these programs. Can an aircraft carrier defend itself from a hypersonic missile? And he said, no, there's no defense from a hypersonic missile. Well, the Iranians have hypersonics. The Chinese and the Russians gave them the technology and they developed it internally, domestically. An aircraft carrier is the size of a city. It has 25,000 sailors on it. Can you imagine if they sank one of those things? Or even just damaged it to the point where it would have to be towed into port for 2 years worth of repairs? I just see nothing good coming of an armed conflict with Iran. And I will say, and this may be a fault of mine, but I'm an eternal optimist. I will say that both the White House and the Iranians last week said, after the first round of indirect talks in Muscat, that progress was made.
Yeah, they're saying progress is being made, but then they're deploying a bunch of war planes and the Ayatollah saying, we're going to sink your ships. I mean, it doesn't sound like things are going well, but maybe both sides just flexing and posturing while the negotiations maybe are actually going well. So John Kiriakou is saying, there is no defense against hypersonic missiles. So we are sending our boys and girls out there to die, essentially to be struck by Iranian missiles, and that would be the end of them. And guess what? Guys like Lindsey Graham say, yeah, that actually might be the case. And, God bless you.
To those who may participate in this endeavor, God bless you. God keep you safe if that day does come. Could our soldiers be hit in the region? Absolutely, they could. Can Iran respond if we have an all-out attack? Absolutely, they can. I think the risk associated with that is far less than the risk associated with blinking and pulling the plug and not helping the people as you promised.
Lies.
We told them to go back in the street, keep protesting. Help was on the way. We have to be good to our word.
We told them.
So
Trump.
This trip is a special trip for me. It's putting a fine point on something I've been working on for over 2 years.
So there you go. He says he's been working on this for 2 years. That's going to war with Iran. And he's finally getting what he wants. He's in Israel right now. And he's saying, Americans might die. And God bless you. That's where we're at with this. Well, you know what, Lindsey Graham, why don't you go out there and sacrifice yourself and your family members rather than the family members of others, all because you just have some sort of a fetish and worshipping syndrome with Israel. But I don't know. Are negotiations going well or not? Hard to tell. Let's hope for the best. But I think we should prepare for the worst, knowing that Israel seems to be in full control of our foreign policy at this point. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can
Red to blue, and then delivered healthcare coverage to 350,000 Texans, fought gerrymandering, and defended reproductive rights. As your attorney general, I could do a whole lot more. Texas could use a good lawyer.
Lincoln, with some reports suggesting But what if the biggest thing? For years, the question hasn't been if the US would strike Iran, but when. The flashpoints are always there, the rhetoric is always heated, and the US has the overwhelming military power to do it. But what if the biggest thing stopping that attack isn't in Washington or Tehran, but is quietly sailing in the Gulf of Oman? China has sent its most advanced warship right into this tinderbox, and in doing so, it may have just changed the rules of the game for everyone. This is the story of how a single ship could be holding back a war. The waters of the Middle East are some of the most strategically vital and volatile on the planet. At the center of it all is the Strait of Hormuz, a tiny choke point where a huge portion of the world's oil flows every single day. For decades, the United States has been the security guarantor for this region, keeping a powerful naval presence to ensure that commerce flows freely. But that presence has another purpose: to project power and contain one of its oldest adversaries, Iran. Tensions are always simmering, but as of early 2026, things have gotten especially bad. Diplomatic talks have stalled out, and the US is amassing significant military force in the region. We've got at least one carrier strike group, the USS Abraham Lincoln, with some reports suggesting a second may be on the way. A preemptive American strike on Iranian military or nuclear sites feels closer than ever. The goal of a strike like that would be to neutralize threats and enforce American policy with brute force. Any plan would hinge on speed, surprise, and overwhelming tech. The US would try to dismantle Iran's command, air defenses, and key assets before Tehran could even figure out what was happening. In a fight like this, every asset counts. A US carrier strike group is a floating fortress of air power and missile defense. Its F-35C stealth fighters, Growler electronic warfare planes, and a shield of advanced destroyers are built to dominate any battlefield. The plan would rely on that dominance, using stealth and speed to create an unstoppable first punch. But in war, plans are only as good as your intelligence. So, what happens when the other guy suddenly gets a new pair of eyes? That's when the entire calculation starts to fall apart. Just as tensions hit a fever pitch, a new player entered the arena. Not with a diplomat, but with the quiet arrival of a task force from the People's Liberation Army Navy. According to maritime tracking sources, a group of China's most advanced warships has been deployed to the Gulf of Oman and the northern Indian Ocean. And leading the pack is the crown jewel of the Chinese surface fleet, the Type 055 destroyer. To call the Type 055 a destroyer is almost an insult. Displacing over 12,000 tons, Western analysts often put it in the same weight class as an American Ticonderoga-class cruiser. It's not just big, it's arguably one of the most powerful surface combatants in the world. It's packed with 112 vertical launch cells that can hold a nasty mix of anti-air, anti-ship, and land attack missiles. But its real power is its brain. The Type 055 is a floating command center with an advanced radar system that can track everything from stealth aircraft to ballistic missiles over huge distances. It's designed to be the quarterback of a naval fleet, to see everything and call the plays.
Most people think trading has to be a grueling full-time job to actually see any results, but there is a way to.
And it isn't alone. The Type 055 is sailing with a highly capable Type 052D destroyer, adding another layer of air defense. But the real wild card here might be the third ship, the Liao Wang 1. This isn't a warship in the usual sense, it's a specialized maritime space tracking and surveillance vessel. Its only job is to watch the sky. Covered in massive radar domes and antennas, the Liao Wang 1 is built to monitor satellite orbits, rocket launches, and missile tests in real time from anywhere on Earth. Together, these three ships are a serious sensor intelligence strike package. The Liao Wang 1 gives them long-range eyes, the Type 055 is the brain and the muscle, and the Type 052D is the loyal bodyguard. This is a self-contained, high-tech naval group, operating thousands of miles from home, right on the edge of a potential war. And you can bet their presence here, right now, is anything but a coincidence. Understanding how this hardware changes the strategic map is exactly what we do here. If you find this kind of analysis valuable and want to know what's really going on behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. The most immediate, game-changing impact of this Chinese deployment is all about intelligence. Surprise is the cornerstone of modern American warfare. A potential strike on Iran would rely on stealth jets and cruise missiles showing up unannounced, taking out air defenses before they can even power on. Well, this Chinese flotilla blows a giant hole in that plan. The Liao Wang 1, working with China's own military satellites, can give a real-time, over-the-horizon picture of the entire region. It can track missile launches, watch U.S. spy satellites, and most importantly, detect the movement of American planes and ships. The deployment of a carrier strike group, the buildup of tanker aircraft needed for a long-range raid, the flight patterns of spy planes, all of that activity suddenly becomes transparent. And there's very good reason to believe China wouldn't hesitate to share that data with Tehran. The two countries have a 25-year strategic cooperation pact that paves the way for deep military cooperation, which is widely seen as including intelligence sharing. This isn't just a theory. China has given Iran cyber surveillance tools in the past that helped dismantle CIA networks. Just recently, Chinese sources released satellite images showing the exact location of a new US THAAD anti-missile system in Jordan. The signal was crystal clear. We are watching, and we see everything. For Iran, this intelligence is priceless. A few hours of warning before strike is the difference between disaster and survival. It gives them time to move their missile launchers, hide key assets, and put their air defenses on high alert. The surprise is gone. Instead of a quick, surgical strike, the US would face a prepared and waiting enemy. That dramatically increases the risk to American pilots and raises the odds of a much longer, bloodier conflict. This shared intelligence basically supercharges Iran's own defenses, making its threat to strike back far more believable. Beyond just feeding Iran intelligence, the physical presence of these Chinese warships creates a strategic nightmare for US planners. Any big strike on Iran would turn the airspace and waters into a chaotic mess. A US commander now has to worry about the very real risk of a stray missile hitting a Chinese warship. The fallout from that would be catastrophic, possibly triggering a direct conflict between two nuclear powers. That's a risk no sane person is willing to take. This situation likely brings back a painful memory for Beijing: the 1999 NATO bombing of its embassy in Yugoslavia. The US called it an accident, but many in China believe it was deliberate. The Type 055 and Type 052D are a powerful insurance policy against history repeating itself. Their advanced air defense systems can absolutely defend them, and their presence forces the US to add a thick layer of deconfliction to any plan. The political cost of striking Iran just went up, big time. This deployment also has to be seen as part of China's bigger plan. While the ships offer a temporary shield, Beijing has been systematically making Iran a tougher target for the long term. This includes supplying precursors for solid-fuel ballistic missiles. While not yet confirmed, it's widely believed that a next step could be providing Iran with advanced air defense systems like the HQ-9B. The HQ-9B is a modern, long-range system with a reach of over 200 kilometers and reported capabilities against stealth aircraft. It would be a massive upgrade over Iran's older defenses. By supporting these systems, China is helping Iran rebuild its anti-access, area denial, or A2, bubble. The goal is simple. Make an air war against Iran so expensive and so risky that the US would think twice before ever starting it. The ships provide the intel, and the land-based missiles provide the teeth. It's a complete, layered defense strategy, with Beijing's fingerprints all over it. But this is about more than just one ship or one crisis. The deployment of the Type 055 is a huge signal that the global order is changing. For decades, the United States was the only country that could project this kind of military power anywhere in the world. That era is over. China is now a true blue water naval power, and it has the ships and the ambition to protect its interests and its allies far from its own shores.
Have you been wondering how people turn side hustles into full-blown online businesses?
This fits perfectly into China's broader strategy. Use limited, often deniable support to get what you want without a direct fight. We see it when they supply missile parts to proxies, use research vessels for military intelligence, and call these deployments anti-piracy patrols, even when the timing and location scream otherwise. There's no evidence the Type 055 would fight for Iran, but it doesn't have to. Its presence alone is a powerful deterrent. It redraws the geopolitical map. It turns a US-Iran problem into a three-body problem, complicating everything for American diplomats and generals. It shows other countries that there's a new power on the block that can offer security, technology, and a shield against American pressure. This is what a multipolar world actually looks like. Of course, there are limits. The US Navy still has more ships and, in many areas, better tech. And some reports suggest the Chinese ships are keeping a flexible route, sometimes operating further away in the Gulf of Aden, giving them plausible deniability. But the message has been sent. The strategic game in the Middle East has been changed for good. A single warship, even one as powerful as the Type 055, can't win a war by itself. But that's missing the point. The genius of this move is that it's not designed to win a war. It's designed to stop one from starting in the first place. By parking a floating, high-tech intelligence agency in the middle of a flashpoint, China has stolen America's biggest advantage: surprise. It has massively raised the political and military risks of a strike, forcing US commanders to stare down the possibility of an accidental escalation with a global rival. This isn't just about Iran. This is a look into the future of great power competition. A future where deterrence isn't just about nukes, but about the smart placement of conventional weapons. It's a world where one destroyer, plugged into a global intelligence network, can hold back a war. The Type 055 in the Gulf of Oman is a quiet, powerful symbol that China has arrived as a global military player, and a sign that the unipolar moment is truly over. What do you think?
Under Suspicious movements were detected by Chinese satellites near Iran's borders, American cargo planes landing under the cover of night, elite commando units equipped with airborne insertion gear, advancing silently toward a location deep inside Iranian territory. The objective, a surgical strike, a mission led by the Pentagon's finest to destroy what bombs and missiles failed to reach at the heart of Iran's nuclear program. But just as the operation escalated, the Russian bear entered the scene. Vladimir Putin didn't wait for the first American boot to touch Iranian soil. He responded by dispatching his Night Hunter helicopters to the skies over Tehran, a Russian monster built for desert warfare, armed with missiles specifically engineered to crush any ground incursion before it even begins. But what is this helicopter Putin sent to Iran, and why does the Pentagon see it as the ultimate nightmare for any airborne landing despite its age? That is exactly what we'll uncover in this episode.
At 4 p.m. Eastern, the market follows a daily rhythm. Positions settle, big money.
The Russian Mi-28, deployed by Putin to Iran, is a heavy attack helicopter with a maximum takeoff weight of 11,500 kilograms and a fully armored fuselage capable of withstanding small arms fire and shrapnel. This makes it ideal for frontline assault missions without needing escort protection. Measuring over 17 meters in length and standing nearly 4 meters tall, its main rudder spans 17.2 meters, giving it extremely stability for low-altitude maneuvering, perfect for hunting human targets across open terrain. Powered by two Klimov TF3 engines, each generating close to 2,500 horsepower. The Mi-28NE can reach speeds of up to 300 km per hour and sustain a combat range exceeding 430 kilometers, extendable via external fuel tanks. This performance allows it to launch from deep within Iranian territory and reach any suspected drop zone in minutes, and then pursue its target through valleys, ridgelines, and mountain passes. More importantly, the Mi-28 was built to operate flawlessly in extreme desert conditions, making it a perfect fit for Iran's arid central and southern landscapes. There, where no vegetation or fog can provide cover and where intense heat disrupts shoulder-fire thermal imagers, this helicopter thrives. Its mast-mounted radar system allows it to detect ground targets while keeping the main fuselage hidden behind terrain or buildings. Coupled with advanced thermal imaging and FLIR night vision, it can lock onto a human heat signature moving in the desert from long distances. Laser targeting systems complete the package, enabling pinpoint guided missile strikes against moving ground targets, even if they are sprinting or camouflaged. This is how the Mi-28 kills airborne landings. What makes this helicopter a true nightmare for US Special Forces isn't just its flight performance, it's the arsenal it carries, built specifically for hunting soldiers and destroying ground units. Its primary weapon is a fixed 30mm 2A42 autocannon, a high-impact weapon with surgical lethality, capable of shredding personnel and light fortifications at over 1,500 meters. Its high rate of fire turns it into a flying chainsaw, ideal for cutting down paratroopers in open terrain or commandos navigating rocky fields. Then comes the greater threat, the 9M120 Ataka guided missiles. Though designed as anti-tank weapons, these laser-guided munitions are just as lethal against 45 bunkers or clusters of soldiers. With a range of 6 to 10 kilometers, they allow the Mi-28 to strike targets from safe distances before troops even realize they are being hunted. And more dangerously, newer variants of the Mi-28NE can now be armed with air-launched Cornet EM missiles, an upgraded thermal tracking warhead designed for precision precision strikes. These deadly projectiles can punch through armored vehicles, building walls, or even cave entrances, perfect for flushing out commandos hiding behind cover. Even without a direct line of sight, these missiles can home in and eliminate threats in rugged, mountainous, or desert terrain. To saturate broader areas, the helicopter also carries 80mm unguided rockets fired in salvos to suppress landing zones, staging points, or fallback routes used by US teams. If a drop is detected, these rockets can turn the entire zone into a firestorm from which escape is nearly impossible. But perhaps the most sinister payload: cluster bombs and airdrop mines. These weapons don't just kill, they trap. They cut off retreat paths, sowing lethal hazards across the exit routes, forcing infiltrating units to remain exposed until they are eliminated. Every weapon on this helicopter was chosen for one mission: to build a layered, unforgiving kill zone that leaves no room for escape or survival. That's why the presence of Mi-28NEs in Iranian skies doesn't just signal readiness. It means that any US soldier dropped into Iranian soil may find nothing waiting for him but fire and steel. And now the question is yours, dear viewer. Do you believe Putin's helicopters will succeed in stopping a US airborne incursion, or will Trump's secret weapon, the same one once used in the attempt to snatch Maduro, bring them crashing down before they even get the chance to fight? Tell us, what do you think?
have fixated on a demonstration clip aimed at U.S. posture in Jordan. Two things can be true at the same time. The region is drifting into a more dangerous phase under Trump's pressure campaign, and Tehran is answering in a very modern way, by turning imagery into strategy. Over the past days, Iranian-linked outlets and regional chatter have fixated on a demonstration clip aimed at U.S. posture in Jordan, and separately on a fresh wave of missile showcase footage centered on the Khorramshahr 4. The missile Iran also brands K-Bar. Put those side by side.
Iran has recently shared a new video of one of its most powerful missiles into the global spotlight. Rather than whispering threats, Tehran chose to show them, unveiling its Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missile.
Tensions in the Middle East have once again moved into focus after Iranian state media released footage showing the launch of the Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missile, also known as the K-Bar missile.
Trump now to do something stupid.
And you can see the message Iran wants audiences, especially Washington, to absorb. We're watching where you stage power, and we're reminding you what we can launch back. Now, quick clarity before we go deeper, because it matters for credibility. Tower 22 is widely described as a small, remote outpost near Jordan's borders with Syria and Iraq, tied to logistics and support missions. Not the kind of large fighter jet ramp you'd associate with rows of F-15s and F-16s. When social media posts describe jets lined up on the tarmac, the base that keeps coming up in current reporting and viral clips is Muwafaq Salti Air Base near Azraq, a key hub for U.S. and allied aviation in Jordan. That distinction is exactly why these videos and claims spread so fast, because people blur locations, and the blur itself becomes part of the psychological effect. If you value this kind of clear-eyed reporting that cuts through the noise, take a second to like and share this video and subscribe, because honest journalism only survives when you back it. Now let's walk through what Iran is trying to do with these visuals, without the breathless hype. The Jordan clip being circulated is presented as a look at the runway and ramp infrastructure of Muwafaq Salti Air Base, wide runway geometry, parking aprons, and the kind of map-like framing that reads more like target familiarization than casual observation. Some versions floating online are described as animated or stylized, rather than raw drone footage, and that's important. An animation can still be a deterrent signal. It doesn't have to be a literal live camera feed to achieve the point. The point is narrative control. We've studied the layout. We understand the ecosystem of support vehicles, shelters, radar or sensor zones, and the rhythm of operations. In a region where U.S. air power often functions as the ultimate pressure lever, Iran's counter move is to say, your airfields and staging hubs aren't abstract to us. And here's where the timing starts to look deliberate. Trump's posture, public threats mixed with talks, creates a constant background hum of maybe strikes, maybe escalation. In that kind of environment, Iran doesn't want to be seen as charging headfirst into war, but it also refuses to look intimidated. So it reaches for a calibrated display, show enough to inject doubt into the opponent's confidence, while staying below the threshold of direct kinetic action. Even Western reporting around the same window describes heightened preparations, base defenses, and contingency planning, which makes Iran's media signaling feel less like random propaganda and more like a chosen instrument in the standoff. Now pivot to the second stream of messaging, the Khorramshahr 4. You've probably seen the clips or the cutdowns, missile bodies in underground corridors, transporter erector vehicles staged like a cinematic reveal, doors opening to daylight, and launch-themed imagery meant to scream survivability. The reporting around this has been unusually synchronized. Multiple outlets describing deployment in underground facilities, linked explicitly to deterrence messaging and the broader U.S.-Iran tension cycle. And I want to correct one technical point that gets mangled constantly in online commentary. Khorramshahr 4 is widely described as liquid-fueled in many technical profiles, even as people online casually label it solid fuel, because it sounds more advanced. That doesn't reduce the threat value, it just keeps the analysis honest. The core headline details that keep recurring in credible reporting are these: a stated range around 2,000 kilometers, and a very heavy payload class, often described around 1,500 kilograms, sometimes framed as over 1 ton, depending on the source. That combination is not about pinprick symbolism. It's about forcing adversaries to think in terms of serious warhead mass and regional reach. And when Iran pairs those figures with underground basing imagery, what gets popularly called missile cities, it's sending a survivability claim. You won't cleanly preempt this with one opening blow. So why pump out these videos now? Because Iran is playing a deterrence chess match that the West pretends not to understand while practicing it daily. When the U.S. parks power near your borders, runs surveillance, and keeps the military option on the table, that's called stability in Western language. When Iran showcases what it can see and what it can fire, it's labeled provocation. That double standard is not a side issue, it's the fuel. Tehran's calculation looks like this: increase the perceived costs of attack, widen the circle of uncertainty around U.S. basing in the region, and do it in a way that preserves deniability and keeps escalation controlled. Now let's talk military reality. What makes a U.S. or Israeli strike on Iran a potentially disastrous, costly blunder, even if the attackers have superior airframes and stealth platforms? First, Iran is not a single target problem. It's a layered, distributed problem. Geography, redundancy, hardened sites, mobile launchers, underground infrastructure, and a doctrine built around absorbing a first punch and responding across multiple domains. Even Western summaries of Iran's missile force emphasize the breadth of systems and the logic of dispersal and hardening. Second, saturation and cost exchange. This is where drones like the Shahed 136 and families adjacent to it matter, not because one drone is magical, but because quantity changes the math. Cheap, plentiful one-way drones force defenders to either spend expensive interceptors or accept leakage. And the swarm logic has been discussed for years in mainstream defense coverage because it flips the cost equation. When Iran signals drones alongside missiles, it's hinting at a layered raid problem: distract, saturate, then push higher-end munitions through stressed defenses. Third, the medium-range ballistic backbone. Names you mentioned like Imad and the broader Sajil class. Sajil is consistently cited as a 2,000-kilometer range category in major summaries, and Imad around 1,700 kilometers. And those figures matter because they frame what Iran can hold at risk across the region, including critical bases and infrastructure nodes. Iran doesn't have to win in the Hollywood sense. It has to make the war politically and economically unbearable for the attacker and for the attacker's regional partners. Fourth, the hypersonic narrative. Fatah. Iran's own presentation of Fatah leaned heavily on speed and maneuverability claims. And even when Western analysts urge caution about exaggerated performance, the strategic point remains. Iran is investing in systems designed to complicate interception and compress decision time. When a defender has less time to classify, track, and engage, mistakes rise, interception efficiency falls, and the attacker's confidence in a clean operation starts to erode. Fifth, the missile cities and underground basing theme. Whether every tunnel clip is exactly what it claims to be is almost secondary to the deterrent purpose. Iran wants to anchor a belief that its retaliatory forces are survivable. Survivability is what keeps deterrence credible. If an adversary thinks they can decapitate your response in the opening minutes, they're tempted to roll the dice. If they believe you can still fire meaningful salvos after absorbing strikes, they hesitate. That hesitation is the space Iran tries to create for diplomacy on its terms, or at least for avoiding a war it didn't choose. Here's the clean way to understand Iran's signaling. Iran uses named systems as brand markers for capability bands. Some are about range, some about payload, some about survivability, some about precision narratives, some about saturation. When Tehran pushes multiple names into the same media cycle, it's not just flexing, it's building a layered deterrence story for multiple audiences at once. U.S. planners, Israeli decision-makers, Gulf states hosting U.S. assets, and Iran's own domestic public. And it's doing it while pointing to the West's selective outrage. The same capitals that normalize Israeli strike doctrines and U.S. forward basing suddenly discover rules when Iran broadcasts deterrence content. So where is the endpoint? It leaves us in a tense, media-saturated confrontation where images and clips are being used like pressure waves, meant to shape calculations without firing a shot. Trump's approach historically thrives on brinkmanship and public threat. Iran's counter-approach thrives on patience, ambiguity, and cost imposition. That's why you're seeing the Jordan airbase familiarization content and the Khorramshahr 4 underground showcase circulate in the same breath. It's Iran saying, we see your staging, we've built survivable response, and we're not negotiating from fear. The danger, of course, is miscalculation, someone believing their own propaganda, or assuming the other side will blink when they won't. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.
He's here with us. Welcome back, Professor Moran.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Nima. It's a great pleasure being with you.
Yeah. Please hit like button, helping us reach in more people. And let me start, Professor Morandi, with what we've learned before coming to this live, which is that Iran will partially close the Strait of Hormuz. What is the action? What is the strategy on the part of the Iranian army when it comes to Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the Iranian Navy, the Revolutionary Guards, is carrying out a maneuver with live ammunition. And so they've partially closed the Strait of Hormuz to carry out those operations. And they are using some of the weapons that will be used against the United States and against anyone linked to the United States, any entity linked to the United States in the Persian Gulf region, because we have to keep in mind, Nima, that all of the Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, which are despotic regimes, there's no freedom in Qatar to say anything about the regime. There's no freedom in the Emirates. There's no freedom in Bahrain. And so these entities, which also host US bases, and those US bases, as we speak, are being used against Iran to prepare for war against Iran, they have no excuse in case war starts. They cannot pretend that they're neutral. They will be complicit in a war of aggression. They can't have their cake and eat it too. They can't have American bases and have the Americans bomb Iran and have friendship with Iran at the same time. It's not going to happen. So Iranian missile capabilities, which are not simply long-range surface-to-surface missiles that we saw used to batter the Israeli regime. Iran's missile capabilities include surface-to-sea missiles, sea-to-sea missiles, short-range missiles, medium-range missiles, and of course, hundreds of thousands of drones that have been put in place to attack assets across the Persian Gulf region and in the Indian Ocean. So the Iranian firepower is enormous and it's spread out, and the vulnerability of Iran's potential adversaries is extraordinary. This is not a normal part of the world. This is not an ordinary region. It is full of oil and gas installations, oil and gas wells. It is full of refineries. It is full of ports for exporting oil and gas, importing goods from the West through all the wealth that is accumulated and from different parts of the world. And then you have ships, tankers coming and going. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz. The Persian Gulf itself is not very wide. Iran controls one side of it and islands in the middle of it. And then there's the Indian Ocean. There is, with the missile capabilities and drone capabilities that Iran has, whether they're from the sea or the land, the global economy will be devastated. And the price of energy will go through the roof. And in addition to that, Nemo, something that I usually don't discuss is that these tiny regimes, they spend a lot of money because they have a lot of wealth. And so a lot of the exports from other countries come to this part of the world disproportionately. So those will come to an end. It will crush the global economy. And Trump, being weak and vulnerable as things are, unpopular, people opposing war in the United States, you now have a very difficult economic situation. It's getting worse in the United States. And then to add on all that is, of course, the exposure of the Epstein class to the American people and the cover-up and the continued cover-up. So he's not going to have popular support when he engages in war, and when the pain starts kicking in, Americans are not going to like that. His own 30% or so supporters are going to be the first to be outraged when they lose their jobs. And then we saw Ayatollah Khamenei today speak about sinking naval ships. This is not a situation which I think any sane person in the United States would want to see turn into a conflict, turn into a military conflict. But then again, Washington is controlled by the Epstein class. This is the Epstein regime. and the people around Trump and in the Senate and the House, they are Israeli firsters. They don't care about the United States or about the global economy or European economies. They care about.
All right, what's the most valuable thing you can do as a trader? I would argue the single most valuable thing you could do is find
Israel. You're muted, Nima.
Yeah, actually, we are
You're
witness.
still muted.
Yeah, let me. Can you hear me, Professor Marandi?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are witnessing some sort of unprecedented escalations between the United States and Iran in the Middle East. We haven't seen this sort of escalation before. You know, when you see in the 2 aircraft carriers, 15 destroyers in the region, and they're bringing a lot of weapons to the region. And on one hand, Donald Trump, who, you know, said that before, he said that he's not seeking regime change in Iran. He changed his rhetoric that maybe the regime change is the best option. What is the response on the part of Iranians to this sort of rhetoric, changing, no regime change, no, let's go after regime change, let's prepare to a new war in the Middle East? What is the Iranian response to that?
I just want to also add to this that this is the position of the entire Epstein class in the United States. Those who hate Trump, like the New York Times, when it comes to attacking Iran, they're all for it. The Washington Post, they're all for it. So they'll constantly say how terrible things are in Iran and how evil the so-called regime is and they're killing people. That's what this is all about. There's a consensus. They want to demonize Iran for ordinary Americans to justify war. So they may hate Trump, but they love war. And so, it's not as if this is an issue about Trump. This is the Epstein class. This is a regime that is controlled by this particular class. And I think the most important thing right now that we have to take into consideration is that while the United States is divided and the American people don't want war, they're not happy with this regime. They're not happy with the Epstein class, any part of it. They despise all of them, whether Democrat or Republican, they're all the same. Whether the New York Times or the Washington Post, whether Fox News or MSNBC, they're all the same. On the Iranian side, we've seen 2 massive shows or 2 massive gatherings of people in Iran across the country on January the 12th and on February the 11th. On January the 12th, after the riots on the 9th and the 10th, where 3,117 people died, hundreds of police officers, this was a conspiracy launched and carried out by the US and Israeli intelligence agencies, probably along with the MI6 and perhaps the French. We know this from the US Treasury Secretary, who said we plan to bring down the currency to bring people to the streets. And then we saw Pompeo, Mossad, Channel 13, 14, 15 of Israel, all of them claimed that both Mossad was involved, the CIA was involved, and that weapons were brought in by foreign agents, intelligence agencies to kill hundreds of police officers and security officials. So this was a conspiracy. And people, and back then Trump was talking about attacking Iran. On January the 12th, millions came to the streets, and roughly 3 million in Tehran. And then the same Western media, this Epstein media, they tried to say that this was AI, this is fabricated. There was helicopter footage over the rally in Tehran, which was unbelievably huge. They said it was AI, which of course was a lie. But then on February the 11th, on the anniversary of the revolution, we even had larger rallies. It's as if Iranians were, even those who didn't come said, well, this time we'll come too, just to show these people that they cannot erase us, these Westerners, Musk and Western media. Unfortunately, a larger number of Western journalists and regional journalists and Asian journalists and others were there. They couldn't hide it. The numbers in Tehran were 25% higher than on January the 12th. So while the West is, the United States is fragmented, Iran is united. And then, as we've discussed before, this is not just going to be about Iran. This is the entire axis of resistance. Yemen is prepared for war and has upgraded its capabilities. The resistance in Iraq is enormous and has not engaged yet. They will be fighting for an existential war. And then the axis across the region will be active. So this is not something that the United States with air power can manage. There are just too many actors, and on the ground, they have the numbers by far. There's nothing that a country like Qatar with a passport holding population of 350,000 can do, or the Emirates, and the corrupted elites. The first people to flee will be the leaders of these tiny Arab family dictatorships. They will fly off to their mansions in Europe and the United States. So for Iran, this will be an existential war. For the axis of resistance, it'll be an existential war. The people in Iran are united, and we see what the situation is in the United States. It just, no matter how you look at it, this will not end well for the United States, and it will definitely not end well for Trump.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, though.
Yeah. The question was focused, Professor Marandi, the Iranian response to the United States. But you mentioned that, yeah, you responded to that. But let me bring what is the objective, because we had the Iranian, the head of the
Just
Iran.
before you ask your next question, what I can say, Nemo, is that Iran has, since the 12-day war, it has been preparing. And while I can't go into details because I don't know many things and I don't pretend to know many things, but Iran, nations close to Iran have been cooperating more than before with high-tech capabilities and with military hardware that Iran doesn't produce, or it doesn't produce at that level. For example, and this may not be, I mean, there are many different things that are coming in, but one thing that has been more or less open knowledge now is the helicopters that have been imported from Russia. And those are apparently very effective for drones.
Those are NATO killers.
So Iran has been building its capability to battle drones for the last 11, 12 months. The US Air Force, any war carried out by the United States will be very expensive, and they will be very vulnerable. But a big part of that will be drones. And so the Iranians are working on their capabilities to deal with drones. And of course, during the 4 years of war in Ukraine, a lot of experience has been gathered by the Russians. And so, a lot of those capabilities and other capabilities that the Russians have, the Chinese have, those have been added to Iran's own capabilities. Iran has purchased weapons and weapon systems and equipment that it needs. And of course, Iran is upgrading its own technology. Its missile capabilities are probably among the top 3 in the world. And it is working on its precision. It's working on payloads. It's working on their maneuverability. So it's just going to be more difficult for Iran's adversaries, and also
Nathan Watkins wants to spend taxpayer dollars on liberal lobbyists pushing a liberal agenda. And Watkins testified to the legislature against capping your property taxes. But Watkins didn't even pay his own. Nathan Watkins, wrong for Texas.
Iran's capabilities to fire missiles from many more places than before it will have a lot more room for maneuver than in the past. There are many ways in which Iran has increased its capabilities. So while the Americans are bringing in their own capabilities, the Iranians are upgrading their own. But at the end of the day, Nima, as I told you, this is a region which is very sensitive, and it's like a a shop full of very sensitive hardware, and a fight in that shop can destroy everything there and create, huge damage. This damage will not be contained to the shop. This damage will create a crisis worldwide, from the south of the Latin America to the north of Europe, from the southern tips of Africa to New Zealand. Everywhere will be affected, and everyone will know that it is Trump that has carried out this, has brought about this crisis. And one reason why the Iranians are negotiating is obviously, if Trump behaves in the same sane manner and is reasonable, there can be a deal. So, I'm not saying it's likely, because the Iranians have said they're not going to give any concessions on missiles or their alliances, or they're not going to give up their right to enrich uranium. But the second reason is that the Iranians want the international community to know that if and when this catastrophe happens, you know who to blame. You know which senators in the United States were calling for war. You know which journalists were calling for war. Look them up. Keep their names. You know which political leaders were calling for war. When you lose your jobs, when you lose your homes, when you are no longer able to, find the sort of materials you need to sustain yourself, then you'll start thinking about who brought this upon you. So the Iranians are negotiating to make sure that everyone knows who's to blame for whatever happens.
When it comes to the Iranian response, my understanding, Professor Marandi, correct me if I'm mistaken, that Iran would respond in a different manner, comparing to what it was during the 12-day war. The strategy on the part of Iranians somehow drastically changed. What are those changes, and how would Iran react if the United States start attacking? Are they gonna stay? Are they gonna think about a measured sort of response, or they're gonna attack each and every target in the region?
Well, it's going to be an all-out war, and that's for sure. But what we were discussing together a few weeks ago, by carrying out this maneuver in the Strait of Hormuz, they're effectively saying the same thing that we've been saying for the last few weeks. That this is not going to be just about Iran and the United States. Iran is not going to just go and strike their military bases or bomb their assets or strike their ships. Iran is going to make sure that all those entities in the Persian Gulf that collaborated with the United States, they too pay a price. They are all complicit. They cannot pretend that they're not. And these regimes, as I've said on multiple occasions, they will not last. Bahrain will not last. None of them will last. They're unpopular. They are the minority in their own country. There are millions of foreign workers who are treated often as slaves and indentured servants and with impunity. This will not end well for the United States. So it will be an all-out war for Iran. Iran will strike very hard from the beginning, and all options are on the table for Iran. It's not just going to be about the military. Anything that is in the U.S. interest will be fair game. Anything. Doesn't even have to be owned by the United States. Anything that's of interest to the United States, whether in the Caucasus or in the Persian Gulf or in the Red Sea. And we have to keep in mind that Yemen fought a 7-week war with the United States. How did that end? Did the United States win that war, or did they have to walk away? Iran's capabilities are far greater than that of Yemen. And then this time around, Yemen is also going to be a part of the war. And Yemen today is not the Yemen of a year ago. They've been preparing. Everyone has been preparing. It's not just the Americans who are bringing assets into the region. Our assets are already here because this is our home turf. It doesn't cost us much to keep our to hold our ground, to stand up against the United States in our own neighborhood. But for them, everything has to be brought across this ocean. They'll have daily costs, and as we speak, they're the ones paying an enormous price to get their assets here. They'll have to pay an enormous price to keep their assets here, and they'll have to pay an enormous price to take them out ultimately. But if there's war, I don't even think that those costs will compare to the economic costs that will be incurred. It will just be no comparison at all.
There's a contract most retail traders have never heard of. It's called XSP. It's not a stock, it's not an ETF, but it's built to mirror the S&P 500.
Just to mention that just both when you talk about Yemen and Iran working with each other, it would be 20% of global use of oil. It's going to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and 25% of LNG in the Strait of Hormuz, and coming together with Bab el-Mandab in the Red Sea is going to be 12% of seaborne oil. These are huge. When it comes to all the calculations, I know that you've mentioned, we know that the head of this Iran, the National Security Council of Iran, Ali Larijani, he went to the Arab states in the region. He talked with them. What is the outcome? Do they know the scale and the greatness of such a war in the Middle East against Iran, and how they can be influenced, they can be destroyed by such a war?
They're very worried, and so is Turkey. So is the Turkish government. But they're too weak. They're all too weak and vulnerable. I was just recently in Moscow, and representatives from the region and Turkey were also there. They were all very worried, but they're not like Iran. They cannot take a stand against the United States. They're obedient. Some may show a bit more, let's say, independence, a tiny bit more like Turkey. The others can't do much. But yes, the Iranian foreign minister, the head of the Supreme National Security Council, and others have warned them of the situation. And another thing, Nima, that I always forget to talk about is Iran's cruise missile capabilities. Iran's cruise missiles are very precise, and they can hit targets across the region. They were not used against Israel, against the Israeli regime, because Israel is far off. But all of Iran's potential targets and key assets in this region can be destroyed with these cruise missiles. So it's not just about, again, long-range missiles or medium-range missiles or short-range missiles or drones. It's not just about surface to ship missiles or ship to ship missiles. It's also a huge cruise missile capability that the Iranians have that will be deployed. The arsenal is massive. I'm not discounting or ignoring the firepower of the United States. The United States is a monstrous regime and is willing to commit any crime. We see from the Epstein documents that have been released, the little bit that they've allowed us to see through, with all the redactions and all the evidence that they've hidden, and overwhelmingly the documents apparently have not been released. Just a tiny bit of them have come out. And we've seen what sort of people they are, what sort of monsters this class of people. Now we all understand why they support genocide. Now we understand why Western journalists and Western media support genocide in Gaza. Now we understand why during the Iran-Iraq war, they gassed Halabja, killing 6,500 people within a couple of minutes, because that's who they are. That's what this regime is. I'm not trying to downplay the viciousness and the power of the United States. But what I am saying is that Iran's power and the vulnerability of the United States because of the what exists, the oil and gas and the markets that exist in this region, and the despots that are totally bound to the United States in the Persian Gulf region, the United States is far more vulnerable than Iran. And the US being divided and on the decline and despised across the world, they've antagonized so many, they've antagonized everyone, the Americans, especially during the Trump regime. The advantage lies with Iran. No matter how brutal and cruel the Americans are, the advantage lies with Iran.
How about Afghanistan? We've learned that Taliban is talking about if something happens, we're gonna support Iran. We're gonna go against the United States. And we know that after Russia, Iran is in the process of officially recognizing the government of Taliban in Afghanistan. What is the current situation between Iran and Afghanistan? How does Iran see Afghanistan in that sort of scenario, a war between Iran and the United States?
I always say there are two groups of people that have always shown an irrational hatred towards Iran. I don't mean like the elites in the West and people under the influence of Western media. One is the mainstream left in the West. They would support Saddam Hussein, but if it's anything connected to Iran, they'll be against it. So they supported regime change in Syria along with the Salafists. They were allied together in supporting the CIA operation, right? And the second is the Salafists. Those people who've been under the influence of US proxies in the region, whether in the Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Erdogan, for decades, they've been trying to antagonize Iran, trying to say that the Iranians, they've been using sectarianism and trying to create sectarian hatred. They've been doing this for decades. And of course, the Taliban, the first wave of the Taliban, which came to power decades ago in the 1990s, they were deeply sectarian. What is happening now is that people are waking up to reality. A lot of people are beginning to see through the Qatari media empire propaganda. It's not just Al Jazeera; they have huge media empire apparatus, and the others that are funded by oil and gas and NATO regimes affiliated with the West. People are seeing through it. They see who's sincere about Palestine. They see who's sincere about Yemen. They see who's sincere about Cuba and Venezuela and elsewhere. So the Taliban, despite the fact that we have major differences, their policy about not allowing girls to go to school, that's just for Iran. That's not acceptable, among other things. But they are seeing that Iran is the only force in the region that is sincere about Palestine. So they're tilting towards Iran, and so is public opinion elsewhere. Everyone is looking now to the axis of resistance as the hope, not just for the region, but beyond. And you see people in Latin America and Africa and elsewhere tilting towards Iran, despite this, huge campaign by the West, Western media, Arab media, media funded by these dictatorships, and sectarian media, and all of this, the work that they've been doing for 47 years, all of this is falling apart because people are seeing who stands with who. Everyone else is with NATO. I mean, you can't be on the fence. You stay on the fence here. You're either with Axis of Resistance or you're with Americans. There's no middle ground. None of these countries have helped the Palestinians. They've tried for years, for decades, to make Palestinians hate Iran. I've seen it with my own eyes. Palestinians tell me that about what Qatari media does, what Turkey does, what in the past, especially the Saudis are less into this sort of thing now, but into Wahhabism and so on. But and how they've always tried to antagonize even Palestinians against Iran. But now people are seeing that none of these regimes will raise a finger for the Palestinian cause. The only thing they'll do is give a few scholarships to Palestinians for public diplomacy and to create a good image for themselves, but they won't do anything. And they won't do anything against Israel now, and they won't do anything against the United States because they're all in the Western camp. So the Taliban, or at least many in the Taliban, influential people in Taliban, are seeing this reality. And it's not just in Afghanistan, it's elsewhere. And I think this is, if you look at how Russia and China have tilted towards Iran, how others have tilted towards Iran, this is a something that is more than just regional. It is global. As I said, you see the mood changing in parts of the world that traditionally Iran has very little influence, if any.
The second round of negotiations after the 12-day war has concluded in Geneva. And again, we had Omanis mediating, indirect talks between the United States and Iran. And so far, from what we've heard, it seems that they're talking about the third round of negotiations. What is the main objective of Iran? Main objectives of Iran? We know that Netanyahu is doing everything to influence the negotiations between Iran and the United States, and he's putting something out about the Iranian missile program, ballistic missile program, and Iranian support to the axis of resistance. That is not acceptable, and Iran is not. As far as I know, these are red lines for Iranian negotiators. Your take on that?
Well, I think all of your viewers should go to the website of the leader, and when the full speech is translated into English and Arabic and other languages, they should read through it. I think some of the key points have been put out on social media, and of course, his accounts are heavily shadow banned, so people have to go and check them themselves. But he was very clear that Iran is not going to give up its nuclear program, that Iran is not going to give up its military capabilities, and of course, Iran is not going to give up its regional alliances. And he actually spoke about Epstein and about the corruption of the political elites in the West, which in Iran, they're not really talking. The Persian language media in the West, BBC Persian, Iran International, all of these media outlets that spend huge amounts of money to talk about news, they are not touching the Epstein files. It's as if nothing has happened. BBC Persian pretends as if it doesn't exist. But he raised it, so hopefully it'll get higher profile inside Iran, because I don't think the Iranian media has been covering it as much as they really should. Another thing that he said in his speech is that he said that Imam Hussein would not give allegiance, someone like Imam Hussein would not give allegiance to Yazid. And he's making reference to Karbala and the grandson of the Prophet, who stood for the oppressed and for and stood up against the despot of the time. And basically, he's saying that the United States is like the Yazid of our era. And as you know better than I, in Iranian culture and Shia culture and beliefs, the Karbala and the story of Imam Hussein and his sister is very central. In Iran, there's no day like the day of Ashura in Iran. Even those who are, they may drink and party. When it comes to, Ashura, at least for a day or two, they show religiosity for the most part, because it is such there's no, if you walk in Tehran on any day of the year, you may see different things. But when it's Ashura, you know it's Ashura. You can tell on the streets and on the homes and the flags in people on people's houses and so on and so forth. So he's speaking of that and basically saying that we are never going to submit to you. It's not going to happen. And so that culture of Ashura, that culture of resistance, as General Soleimani once famously said, we are the nation of Imam Hussein. This is something that the Americans fail to grasp. I mean, why would the Epstein class understand this? They have no notion of spirituality. The journalists at the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post, or they're employees of the Epstein class. And they too either have no notion or have no ability to express or to pursue this line of thought. This is something that makes Iran and the entire axis of resistance resilient in a way in which I think for the Americans will be catastrophic. And he's alluding to all of this. He's warning the Americans what can happen. At the same time, he told his audience, carry on with business as usual, get on with your lives, do your business. People should carry on with business as they did in the past. Our military, the armed forces, they are prepared and ready. And the Iranians, as you know, the armed forces are prepared, and they are preparing more every day. We keep hearing about new American jets coming into the region. The Iranians are doing their own thing. But they don't make a lot of noise about it. But when the day comes, then the West will figure it out. They'll understand what a catastrophe has befallen them.
Professor Marandi, do you think that when you talk about the Epstein class, you basically talking about Netanyahu being capable, having a lot of leverage on Donald Trump because of not just Epstein, but because of the whole culture that is there and their whole, force that Epstein is part of it. The big picture is far greater than what we're talking about. But how do you see the leverage that Netanyahu has on Donald Trump in these negotiations?
Well, there's a lot of talk about Netanyahu probably having a lot of dirt on Trump. We don't know, but what we can assume from the Epstein files is that since most of the files are being hidden and that much of the key elements are redacted, and that very little that we see is horrific, I think it has punched a major hole into the power of the elites in the West. Those elites that are above politics, the real power, the oligarchs, though they are the ones who are the decision makers, and they're Zionists. And to enter the club, you have to be like them. You have to, I guess, do as they do. But they're the ones with the real power. The political parties, Labor and Conservative, or Democrat and Republican, all this is a joke. The MSNBC and Fox News, this is just, when you look, they're all in it. They're all in the club. And those who work for them are just employees, whether they're presidents or prime ministers or whether they're parliamentarians, it doesn't matter. The very fact that you see that everyone is quiet about it, they're not telling the full story, they're trying to pretend that the Russians are, collectively, the media saying that Epstein is a Russian spy, and no one believes it, but it just shows how powerful this Epstein class is, that all the media is coordinated, just like they're coordinated with one another to create a particular image of Iran to encourage war and to justify war. The same is true with regards to Russia. The same is true with regards to distraction away from Israel, from Epstein, or Epstein's roots. All of that just increasingly exposes the Epstein class for what it is, and that makes them more vulnerable. So while Netanyahu, who has the backing of the Epstein class, has enormous power over Trump, I think the bigger picture is that the Epstein class is in trouble. The American people, if already we're beginning to see signs of of, of real dissent, of real anger, of real rage emerging. And we're seeing Trump's popularity plummet. And then if we have war, everyone will know what this war is about. And when that war hits Americans, then I think the Epstein class is in big trouble. I think this war will not end well for the Israeli regime. You know, don't get me wrong, Nima. You know me. I don't support war. I don't want war. I don't want war anywhere. I fought war. I fought as a volunteer in war. I've been to Syria many times. I've been to Lebanon many times. I've been to Iraq. I've seen a lot of death and destruction over the years. But at the end of the day, if there is war, we will persevere. We will win that war, and we will make sure that the United States is defeated. And I think that I'm quite confident that it will be the end of the U.S. empire. It may have even been worse than that. But there is not a chance in the world that the Iranians will allow the Americans to gain the upper hand. This is a war for our survival. It is a war between Iran and the Axis of Resistance and the Epstein class and the Epstein regime. And there's not a chance in the world that Iran will allow them to get the upper hand.
You've got ideas, a new project, a better workshop, a renovation that...
What were the lessons for the Iranians to confront the United States when it comes to the conflict? Because we know that the understanding on the part of Iranians were somehow different from the understanding on the part of Russians, because Russians were before the war happening on Iran, before the attack happening on Iran. What is the lessons that Iran has received from the 12-day war and from the war in Ukraine in terms of understanding the American behavior and how to respond to America?
Well, first and foremost, Iran's, as you mentioned yourself before, when we were on together with Larry, when I was pointing out that a senior Iranian commander said that Iran's doctrine has shifted completely from defensive to offensive. So Iran, when war starts, it is going all out. It will destroy everything and swiftly. So this is the Iranian doctrine. That is a big change. Second, Iran, unlike the Americans who are always carrying out wars and murder and slaughter, and the Israelis who do the same, Iran hasn't engaged in war since Saddam Hussein invaded the country in the 1980s. So during True Promise 1, 2, and 3, Iran learned a great deal. True Promise 1 caused Iran to become much more effective in True Promise 2. And if it wasn't for True Promise 2, True Promise 3 wouldn't have led to the Israeli regime seeking a ceasefire. So in a sense, our enemies helped us to learn how to use our new technologies and our Iranian-made equipment. And during the 12-day war, Iran learned about all its weaknesses and its strengths, and it's been working on them since. And as you know, Iran's true power is not directed towards the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime is not a threat to Iran. It is a tiny regime completely dependent on the West for its mere existence. It needs tens of billions of dollars a year just to sustain itself and to carry out the genocide with Western support. It is the United States that is the real threat. The Iranians, ever since the United States took Afghanistan and Iraq, the Iranians have been preparing for war. Ever since the United States, Bush and Obama started saying all options are on the table, and Iran became the axis of evil, and that Bush State of the Union address, written by a Zionist, by the way, that speech, David Frum. These are the people who make the narratives, whether it's in the White House or in the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's Zionists. It is the Epstein class. But the Iranians have been preparing themselves with medium-range missiles, underground bases across the Persian Gulf region, the Indian Ocean, medium-range missiles, short-range missiles, drones, asymmetrical warfare, a navy that's designed for asymmetrical warfare. Iran has been preparing for war with the United States for at least 2.5 decades. So the firepower that Iran can direct towards the United States is infinitely greater. And again, when I mean the United States, I'm not talking about a few ships. I'm not talking about a few bases. Their real vulnerability is when the economy goes down. And some Americans, when they speak with me, they say, well, we're self-sufficient in energy. When the prices go through the roof, the consumer will pay. A few billionaires will make some money, but the US economy will collapse. Price of gasoline, the price of energy, imports, exports, the world will change. It will be a catastrophic situation. And then you'll see people on the move. If Americans and Europeans are worried about immigration and refugees, imagine what it will be like when tens of millions of people from Latin America and Africa and Asia are on the move to a place which is collapsing too. But still, they'll be on the move because they'll feel that they have to go somewhere. So where will they go? They'll go to Europe and the United States. So the warmongers will be creating a crisis, an unprecedented crisis that they will not be able to manage. So this shift away from defensive to offensive, a defensive doctrine to an offensive doctrine, and the awareness that has been created about Iran's capabilities, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and the move to deal with them, and the fact that other countries are now more concerned and worried about the United States, so they've moved closer to Iran. You mentioned Afghanistan, but it's also China, Russia, Iraq. So it is going to be much more difficult for the United States. Again, war is horrible, and when the United States, if it engages in war, a lot of Iranians will definitely be killed because the United States is ruthless. The Americans and the Israelis are the same, and their journalists have no decency, no morality. When they slaughter people, the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN will say these are surgical strikes, and they'll pretend as if, just like during the 12-day war, when the Israelis were slaughtering families and bringing down apartment blocks, they were saying how these are fantastic airstrikes and how they gathered intelligence, as if like the homes of people are secret. But they didn't care about the kids because these are the Epstein class. This is the Epstein class media. They're owned by the Epsteins of the world. So, I'm sure that many will be killed, and I'm sure if there's war, and I'm sure that the Western media will pretend that these are all surgical strikes, whereas they'll mostly be they'll all be innocent people because it's a war of aggression. But the vulnerability of the United States in our region is as such that the damage that will be done to the United States simply cannot be calculated, and to the entire West.
I think many of our audience would be amazed. I know that most of them don't know Persian, or they don't follow the Iranian media inside Iran. They would be amazed, and in the Iranian media, they're not that much talking about Israel and how powerful Israel is, and nobody's caring about Israel in terms of military and nothing. But everything you hear from the Israeli media is all about Iran and the capabilities.
No, you're absolutely correct. Ordinary Iranians do not consider the Israeli regime to be a threat. They consider it to be an enemy, but not a threat that can undermine Iran. It's just not doable. And people don't believe that the United States can win a war against Iran either. And we'll see. But again, as I said, the Iranians have carefully prepared themselves. The maneuvers in the Strait of Hormuz are a message.
It's just me and you, girl.
to everyone that don't count on any more oil coming from this region. And that will mean the price goes up fourfold, threefold, fivefold, I don't know, and LNG. And again, it's not just that. As I said, this will disrupt trade, and a lot of the ships will be destroyed. And imports and exports, this region is it's a consumer economies in these Arab dictatorships. They consume way more than most countries. They waste tons of money every day. So it will be overwhelming, and these regimes will fall most probably. I mean, if there's war, I don't see how they will last. It is, the thing is, Nemo, that in the West they simply do not comprehend Iran. I would advise all senators in the United States and all Congress people and people in the White House to read, about Ashura and Imam Hussein and Iranian, the worldview of the axis of resistance, to get a grasp of what they're up against. Maybe if they did that, there would be more sanity. But again, the Epstein class rules over them. So we'll have to see. But as I said, everything is crumbling in the West. You see it crumbling in front of your eyes. The whole world is talking about it. People in the West are waking up to it. I've been reading online how people's views of the United States in the United States have changed. They are just as much ordinary Americans. Many of them feel as if they are victims just like everyone else, and they are, and they're waking up to that reality. So if Trump pushes, he's just going to widen those cracks very swiftly.
The importance of these negotiations today and compared to what it was before is the presence of Europeans. What I've learned from the Iranian foreign minister, days ago, he said that the trades between Iran and Europe is less than what Iran has with Afghanistan. What is that? What do they want? I don't understand these Europeans. What is the understanding? What is the perception on the part of Iranians considering European countries?
Well, I've heard that the foreign minister is even tougher than Dr. Bagheri was when he was in charge of the negotiation. And the Europeans, they have no status. They've burnt all their bridges with Iran, with Russia, with China. The Americans don't respect them. They've lost their place at the negotiating table. We don't care about them anymore. And they're not important to us. As you pointed out correctly, the aid that we provide to Afghanistan and the trade that we carry out with Afghanistan is far more extensive than with the Europeans. And a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you remember, the Iranian foreign minister slapped down the German chancellor when he did an anti-Iranian tweet. He tweeted back at him and hit him very hard, and basically brushed him off. Europeans are, Europe is going to become less important. Every day that goes by, every single day, the Europeans are growing weaker. And this will continue in the years ahead, unless there is some sort of upheaval in Europe, or there's some sort of revolution or some sort of drastic change. With the current leaders in Europe, they're destined to greater misery. And if there's war between Iran and the United States, the Europeans will suffer immensely. They are already in crisis. They're already moving towards deindustrialization because of the energy costs that they impose upon themselves. If they're worried about their little garden, wait till the refugees from across the world start pouring in when war starts. So they're in a very bad place, and the Iranians have no interest in speaking with them.
Yeah. The other part, Professor Marandi, which was mentioned by the Iranian foreign minister in Doha, is that the core, the center of the conflict between Iran and the United States is what's going on in Palestine, in Gaza. We know that Israel is bombing Lebanon, not just only Gaza and the West Bank, they're bombing Lebanon as well. And the situation in Lebanon is not is not improving in any sense in terms of the way that Israel is attacking Lebanon. What is happening with the case of Hezbollah, and what is the policy of Hezbollah toward this sort of escalation on the part of Israelis?
Yes, the real issue between Iran and the United States and the Epstein regime is Palestine. It's always been about Palestine. It's never been about the nuclear program. It's never been about, terrorism or human rights. I mean, come on, the Epstein class and human rights, it's a joke. But it's never been about any of these things. It's always been about Iran's support for liberation movements, Iran's independence, and the most important liberation movement of them all, Palestine, Palestinian people. And it's only Iran that cares about Palestine. It's only the axis of resistance. No one else cares. People care. People on the streets across the world care, from Australia to Istanbul to Caracas to St. Louis in the United States. People care. People are waking up. People have woken up, but the governments don't care. I mean, we just saw that when the Americans were trying to dictate terms to Iran a couple of weeks ago, Al Jazeera put out a piece of news, Al Jazeera, saying that Turkey and Qatar and Egypt have put a proposal where Iran cuts off its assistance to its regional allies, meaning Hamas, meaning Islamic Jihad, and Iran, limits its missile capabilities and its nuclear program. I mean, how pathetic can these three governments be if we take the Al Jazeera report seriously? They pretend to support the Palestinian people, Al Jazeera. They don't. I mean, the staff does, but the policy of the state doesn't. The state is with the United States. It's a proxy. Or most of the staff, the ordinary staff, the people higher up, they don't care. But but they are putting forward a proposal for Iran to stop supporting the Palestinians, the resistance. Really? And so do these people who've been brainwashed for 47 years by Salafi and Wahhabi propaganda, or those leftists in Europe who've always showed this irrational hatred towards Iran, are they going to wake up like everyone else has, or are they going to continue to keep their head in the sand and pretend that their anti-Iranian propaganda, their anti-resistance propaganda has any validity whatsoever? So there's the Iranians at the negotiating table are going to be tough. The Iranians are not going to give the Americans any sort of concessions that violate Iran's sovereignty. The foreign minister is not going to give any unnecessary concessions. Any deal with the United States, any potential deal, is going to be about the nuclear program and giving assurances. I don't think they really believe that they need assurances, but giving assurances that because this is not really about the nuclear program at the end of it, but giving assurances that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful. There is a possibility for a deal because Trump may he may need an off-ramp. So, and it's Trump. He will say, just like with Yemen, he say we won and they capitulated, and he walk away, and his MAGA supporters, they're a cult. I mean, they can shoot a woman in the face, and a white woman in the face, a young white woman in the face, nothing happens. They can shoot a medic in the back, a medic who was working with veterans. They can, anything that Trump does, that base will, Epstein doesn't matter to them. But Trump knows that I assume that if there is war, things could unravel. So, but if he does decide to walk away, if he's sane enough not to engage in war, then he can just, just say, I won, like with Yemen, and then his base will be satisfied. The Epstein class won't be happy, but in any case, the Iranians are not going to give anything to the Americans or that violate Iran's.
WellBe works as your trusted partner to find the right mortgage for your budget and your dreams. Our mortgage specialist.
Sovereignty. And by the way, when Iran insisted that the negotiations take place in Oman, and right now, as you rightly pointed out, the negotiations today are being held in the Omani embassy. The reason why they go back and forth is because the distance for the Americans is far greater than the Iranians. Oman is very close to Iran. So they allowed it to, but still it's going to be Oman who mediates. But the point is that the Americans, they put preconditions on first. They said, you have to, all these things have to be on the table. Iran said no. And the Americans were forced to accept Iran's terms. And Iran said in Oman, indirect talks, just like when? Just like before the 12-day war. What symbolism is there in this? First of all, the Iranians are showing that they have strength. The Americans were forced to accept Iran's conditions. But second of all, the Iranians are telling the international community, look, remember last time we were here and we were negotiating between the 5th round and the 6th rounds, they conspired to attack us. We don't trust them. And it was, you recall, during the first round, things went well. And Witkoff went on Fox News and said, yes, we'll, enrichment is okay for like 3.6 whatever percent for nuclear, for civilian purposes. And then he moved the goalpost. And then again, he kept moving the goalpost until they actually carried out war against Iran. So by doing this, Iran is reminding the world where we were last time round, and that we simply don't trust the United States.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
It's a great honor, Nima. Thank you very much for having me.
Question of principle. Do you help people in countries defend themselves, especially countries when you can do so on a legal basis and avoid any kind of backlash from the United States? Or do you do what those who are so idealistic and who believe you can just blow up the world and that will end up leading to a better outcome? China is going to choose the option that benefits itself and still brings benefits to its partners. This was in the Jerusalem Post. Oftentimes we find out about this cooperation from the Zionists, from the imperialists. This is all very practical, while at the same time very incredibly helpful. Integrating radars, production lines, helping Iran move their missile systems underground. I mean, this is very practical assistance, Ben, that helps Iran maximize its own capabilities and keeps the relationship on an equal basis, which is I think one of the a huge priority for all countries involved, including Iran. We don't see Iran begging Russia and China for military support beyond transfers of very practical technology, and I think that's intentional.
No, I think you said it really well. Again, people assume that all governments operate like the U.S., where the U.S. just like announces everything that it's going to do. I mean, sometimes the U.S. doesn't announce everything, but it announces a lot of things. And other governments don't operate that, especially the Chinese government. The Russian government sometimes announces a little bit more, but the Chinese government, again, its strategy is based on maintaining a low profile, not just publicly announcing what you're doing and operating behind the scenes. And I have no doubt that, especially in the past year, after the last time the US bombed Iran in May, that Iran has been preparing and has gotten, technology and weapon systems and such from China and Russia. And I think Iran is much more prepared now than it was then. I'm not saying that Iran was totally unprepared last year, but let's not forget what I mentioned earlier, that Iran had been in negotiations, and Iran thought these were real negotiations with the Trump administration. And we now know it was a ruse. It was an illusion to try to keep Iran unprepared, relatively unprepared, off guard for this, surprise U.S.-Israeli war. They're much more prepared now.
Major blowback on the United States, which is a very common development whenever the U.S. is trying to engage in a war that it simply cannot win. And I think it goes even further, of course, beyond, and I think it comes full circle beyond just this strengthening of the multipolar world. I think also what we've seen in Iran is we've seen Iranians come together in a massive way, maybe to a larger extent than has happened, in recent history. And I just want to pull up some examples of this. The anniversary of the Islamic Revolution just happened, the 47th. And here's just one photo of how many people were out in the streets. There were estimates of about 30 million across the country. That's almost 1/3 of the entire population were celebrating in this way. And Ben, I just wanted to play this video that I found very powerful. I'll have to read it because it is not in English, but I wanted to pull it up here from someone who was once opposed to the government. And here's what she had to say after all of these, the riots, the proxy war that killed thousands of people in Iran that U.S. and Israel sponsored, and then, of course, all of these strike threats. Here was her message. She says, "I'm a lawyer and a social worker, and I've also been a political prisoner. I've been banned a lot. I was a starred student, too. I even condemned government policies." She continues to say that, but because right now the Ayatollah Khamenei is at the front line of defending Iran because of him and the call that he made, I am joining this march for the first time in my life. So those outside of Iran who think that by sanctioning and emptying the streets, she goes on to say, they can attack Iran, know that as long as people like me in Iran exist, they can't even dream of coming to Iran.
Introducing Iron Beam, a bright choice for futures trading. Iron Beam is an industry-leading broker.
So that's the sentiment right now, Ben, in Iran, given all these attacks. So you have a strengthening development in terms of the relationship that Iran has to its most powerful friends. And then you also have inside Iran a massive consolidation of popular support. It seems to be a recipe for disaster when it comes to attempting to attack a country like this and hope to gain anything out of it. Ben, what is your reaction to this?
Yeah, I've seen that sentiment before several times. I mean, it's not just this isolated individual, where there are people who might have criticisms and disagreements with the government, but when it comes to being threatened by the US and Israel, they're going to defend their sovereignty, and they know that the government is representing that sovereignty. They need to be able to prevent the US and Israel from invading them and imposing a puppet like the, fail son of the former US-backed dictator, the Shah's son, Pahlavi. Like, they're not going to allow this to happen. He's extremely unpopular. And there have been reports, by the way, that the so-called prince, the exiled so-called prince, Pahlavi, has been meeting with US government officials. I mean, that's not surprising at all. We've known that for years, the US government has tried to put this puppet in power. This guy spent most of his life living in the US and Europe. I mean, he's a total puppet. Now, in terms of the US attacks on Iran, a point that I've really been emphasizing in my work, and I published a video and an article about this, is the economic war, which is so devastating and even deadlier than the military conventional war. I really hope we don't see a conventional military war. Unfortunately, I think that the U.S. will probably bomb Iran again. Whether or not that expands into a bigger war, we'll see, or whether or not it's like last time where it's 2 weeks, we'll see. But the economic war has already been very devastating and deadly. First of all, I'll point out that a recent peer-reviewed academic study in The Lancet, the leading medical journal, found that illegal U.S. and European sanctions are responsible for 560,000 deaths per year on average over the past several decades. So we're talking about tens of millions of deaths in the past few decades because of illegal Western sanctions on Iraq, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, DPRK, Zimbabwe, Eritrea. I mean, these countries that have been suffering under illegal sanctions for so long. Let's not forget that back in the Clinton administration, the Secretary of State was the war criminal Madeleine Albright, and she was famously asked in a 60 Minutes interview about a report that found that 500,000 Iraqi children died because of the illegal U.S. sanctions against Iraq. And this is because they couldn't get medicine and medical equipment and even food. So 500,000 children died. And the journalist asked Madeleine Albright, is the price worth it? And Albright said, yes, the price is worth it. So this is a sitting U.S. Secretary of State live on TV saying, yes, we starve and kill 500,000 children for our empire, and we think it's justified. That's not a new policy. It's been going on for decades now. And Iran has suffered from those sanctions, along with Cuba and Venezuela. I know later you want to talk about the barbaric medieval blockade that the U.S. has put on Cuba to try to kill as many Cuban civilians as possible. Just totally medieval, just fiendish, vile, disgusting monstrosity that the U.S. is doing there. Well, in Iran, it's not as extreme, but it's still pretty devastating. Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, has publicly said in multiple speeches that the U.S. is trying to collapse the Iranian economy. That's the language he used. He said they're trying to collapse the Iranian currency, the rial, to make it worthless, to destroy the purchasing power of 93 million Iranians. I mean, this is not just the government, right? Like, if you're an Iranian, you're paid in reals. Like, you're not paid in dollars. Your paycheck is in reals. So if the U.S. goal is to destroy the purchasing power of the rial, which is the stated goal, according to Scott Bessent, and he boasted of causing all this inflation in Iran, what they're boasting about is destroying the purchasing power of average Iranians and making their paychecks worthless. And then Bessent took credit for the protests, the very violent riots and protests in Iran. And he said that it's because we collapsed Iran's economy. So, I mean, again, this is just barbaric. This is the U.S. waging a scorched earth economic war to try to destroy the Iranian economy, assuming that if they make people suffer from hunger and shortages and high rates of inflation, then the government will fall. But in some cases, what actually happens is this actually forces people who were critical of the government to actually rally behind the flag, to support the government, like that woman we saw in the video there, because they understand that despite the differences they have with the government, the state is acting to defend their sovereignty, and they do not want to be colonized and controlled by a foreign power.
And you mentioned earlier, Ben, Starlink, it was just really, there was just a report that had come out in the Wall Street Journal as we speak. The report was from the Wall Street Journal that the U.S., this was a U.S. operation, 6,000 Starlink terminals went to Iran during the whole so-called, this is Israeli media, Ynet, the protest crackdown, the riots that killed upwards of 3,000 plus people. Iran has every reason to do anything it can to maintain its sovereignty. It has literally, you had one of the richest, capitalists in the world trying to funnel through the U.S. government these terminals, and it all served as a part and parcel of what Scott Besson admitted was that the U.S. tried to sink Iran's economy and its currency in order to achieve regime change. And now it seems like all of that has been forgotten, and we're just talking about a nuclear deal.
Yeah, well, again, it's not really just a nuclear deal. It's capitulation. The U.S. wants Iran to abandon Palestinians, abandon its foreign policy, and to just be totally compliant, like what the U.S. is trying to force Venezuela to do. The U.S. literally told Venezuela, you have to cut your ties with your most important partners, China, Russia, and Iran, and Cuba. I mean, it's outrageous. The U.S. wants to apply the so-called Monroe Doctrine to the entire world. That's the strategy of U.S. foreign policy. A global Monroe Doctrine, a global dictatorship controlled by the U.S. And in terms of Iran and Starlink, that was a very funny report when I saw that, because I'm sure you saw this, Danny. There were all these idiots. I'm not even going to beat around the bush, just complete idiots who claimed that, oh, it was young bootstrapping protesters and dissidents in Iran who they raised money and they bought thousands of Starlink units. Oh yeah, because they have, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars just sitting around you have to literally be a child or just a complete idiot to believe that nonsense. That was the narrative we were fed for a few weeks there. And then the Israeli media says, oh yeah, by the way, this was the US government. Duh. I mean, again, it just shows that you can't believe half of what's said in the Western media about Iran or any of these countries. And the so-called journalists repeating the stories before that were just, again, they're just propagandists. They're stenographers for the US government. If they actually believe that Iranians were just raising money to buy
Did you know that AI is set to create 97 million new jobs by 2025? These new AI.
It's so stupid.
Yeah. Buy Starlink even though you're sanctioned to hell. You actually don't have access to Starlink unless there's an exception being made. And the only exception that can be made is through an operation. So it's the only way, right? Because Elon Musk is not going to be caught dead violating U.S. sanctions. No way. Has he done it before? No.
And he's getting paid. He's not going to give that for free. I mentioned earlier that Starlink has provided this technology to Ukraine, the far-right Venezuelan opposition, and Iran. But I'm sure the U.S. government was paying for that. Elon Musk he's the world's richest billionaire oligarch. I mean, he does not do anything for free. So anyway, getting back to this issue of Iran, it was so obvious this was an attempt to overthrow the Iranian government. And the difference with Trump is he never hides this stuff. Previous U.S. leaders will say, especially Democrats will talk about democracy and human rights and all this nonsense and say, oh, we're not involved. Trump boasts of it. Trump, during these violent riots and this insurgency, an Israeli journalist admitted that he said a foreign country was giving weapons to these violent insurgents in Iran to try to overthrow the government and to kill security forces. He didn't name what the country was, but we don't need to speculate. It's the U.S. and Israel, obviously, are giving weapons to these Iranian extremists, these insurgents, to overthrow the government. And this is why there's been all this reporting of the death toll in Iran and mistranslation of the comments made by Ali Khamenei, who said there were around 3,000 deaths of everyone. That's not just rioters and protesters. That includes hundreds of security personnel. We don't even know how many were killed by these U.S. and Israeli-backed insurgents with weapons, according to an Israeli journalist for a major Israeli media outlet. And then the U.S. is spending who knows how much money and working with the CIA and stuff to send Starlink to Iran in order to coordinate, just like it's doing in Ukraine. So this is a low-intensity war that the U.S. is waging, the U.S. and Israel are waging against Iran. And if you believe this childish propaganda, this Western narrative that it's just peaceful protesters and the evil regime and the mustache-twirling villain in Tehran, they just shoot protesters because they're just bloodthirsty and they just love killing innocent people. If you believe that, I mean, you've given yourself a lobotomy. You are not on planet Earth. You are on Mars. You do not understand anything about the world. Fortunately, I think a lot of people now see through this propaganda, especially people who remember the lies about Libya in 2011, and then the lies about the so-called peaceful protesters and moderate rebels in Syria who ended up being Al-Qaeda. And now the leader of Syria is literally the leader of Al-Qaeda. I mean, I'm not in any way exaggerating. The unelected dictator of Syria right now, backed by the West, was the leader of Al-Qaeda, and he was in ISIS. So if anyone still believes this ridiculous propaganda about evil regime gunning down peaceful protesters, I'm sorry, just like you've been living under a rock for the past 20 years. And if you still believe it at this point, then there's no like you're never like, you must believe that Israel was defending itself in Gaza. Like, that's the level of lobotomy you have given yourself.
Yeah, what I find so interesting about Donald Trump himself is how he'll literally. I mean, we played the JD Vance where he says, "No, we're not about regime change." When literally they were talking about getting rid of. They were talking about it was being leaked in the media intentionally that the U.S. wanted a fast strike and they wanted to eliminate all of the leaders of Iran's military and its government because, and why it was leaked publicly? Well, they want people to know that there's not going to be a major war. But
Denny, let's not forget last year, Trump posted on Truth Social, his website, he called for regime change. He used the term regime change,
right.
And he's been using the slogan, "Make Iran great again." He keeps saying that.
Instead of what usually happens in U.S., neocon foreign policy establishment world where they try to lie to our faces or they try to paint a picture so we are convinced to support the regime change operation. Now what you have is Donald Trump doing exactly what you said, Ben, and then, a couple weeks later when it doesn't work out, the narrative is different, right? Oh, we love the talks. We just want to talk, right? We're all just about coming to a deal. It's capitulation. We'll keep trying to hammer home these intractable demands that are not going to be at all approved by Iran, and we're just going to keep trying to hit them over the head with it. But that's all we want. We're not really for regime change. That it's like a cognitive dissonance that's being consistently paraded to us in order to, I think, just deflect attention, because when things don't work out, it doesn't look too good for the exceptionalist empire led by one of the most outwardly arrogant presidents that we've had in generations.
You see this house case study in Florida? Well, let me show you how educated investors can invest into it with very little money.
No, I agree with you. You said it very well.
But before, I wanted to just also ask you before we move on, Ben, about, there's a lot of, of course, talk about Iran. What can Iran do? How can Iran defend itself? But I think there's often when the U.S. gets to the brink of war, when it gets to a point where it's going to conduct an operation of some kind, when there's buildup toward this, there can be almost an overestimation. The U.S. has a long track record, a lot of bodies, a lot of casualties, a lot of people have been killed by the U.S. empire. But I think there can often be an overestimation of what the U.S. empire can actually do. And, we have just some developments here where you have just routine things going on. We know that the U.S. is now blockading the entire Caribbean, South America, the oceans and the waters surrounding them. And you just have incidents like this where they're occupying so much space that they're just running into each other at this point, colliding into each other. But then you have just straight up incompetency, right? You have this hubris-ridden empire, Ben, and it tends to make a lot of errors. When you have an offensive empire that really only knows to kill people, you have a lot of problems that occur when you actually have to do something, or when you have to react to a situation. And here we have the military engaged in high-energy lasers to shoot down what appeared to be foreign drones near the southern border of the U.S. The flying material turned out actually to be a party balloon, and one balloon was shot down. What's not mentioned there, similar to the whole Chinese spy balloon scandal you probably remember, Ben, is that it costs like a lot of money to do that. It costs, the spy balloon thing, I think, cost Joe Biden's administration $3 to $5 million U.S. tax dollars. This probably, even if it was less, it always costs almost to $1 million, given what the U.S. military-industrial complex charges these days. So, what do you make of just the overall U.S. imperial position in the world right now? It seems to be getting into wars that, when it comes to Iran, Russia, and then China, these are much more difficult, and the limitations of this empire appear to be more visible than in years prior.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the balloon incident in the Biden administration, where, again, we were bombarded with this propaganda in the media claiming that China had intentionally sent a spy balloon over the US because that's the only way China could ever get intelligence in the US and spy on the US is with a balloon, a weather balloon. It was total nonsense. There was this insane paranoia and hysteria in the media for a few days. They shot it down with missiles, and then it was later admitted by the US military that actually it was a mistake, that this weather balloon got blown off course and China was not intentionally trying to spy on the US. And now we see, again, this ridiculous hysteria of them shooting down a party balloon. You can also see it more cynically, where when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the US is spending $1 trillion per year in the military. Trump now wants to expand it to $1.5 trillion per year, which I think he will accomplish that because, there are warmongers in both parties. And, this has been a bipartisan issue. Democrats and Republicans always support expanding the military budget. So I have no doubt he will accomplish that. And when he does, the U.S. will now spend more in its military than every single country on earth except for China, all combined. So all of the countries on earth except for China, all of what they spend on their military, that'll be less than what the U.S. does. Totally crazy. But anyway, getting back to this issue of, like this fear and this incompetence, and when you're surrounding the entire world with 800 foreign military bases, it's a lot of energy and resources, and sometimes you become careless and reckless. This gets back to this issue that I've been stressing throughout our discussion today here, which is the U.S. is really good at bombing and attacking small little countries that can't defend themselves, overthrowing their governments, causing chaos and destruction, and then just coming home and saying, okay, it's your responsibility. This year is the 15th anniversary of the US-led NATO destruction of Libya. And NATO has rehabilitated itself because of the war in Ukraine. But the Global South has not forgotten that NATO destroyed Libya, the most prosperous country in Africa with the highest standard of living in Africa, a peaceful country. And since then, Libya has been a failed state with an ongoing civil war, 2 competing governments, no unified central government. Open-air slave markets were opened in Libya, selling sub-Saharan African refugees as slaves. That's the great victory of NATO and the West in Libya. And now, the U.S. is threatening Iran, threatening Cuba. It already attacked Venezuela, and there's a very real possibility it could attack Venezuela again. So I just keep stressing this point, but it's so important. If people go away taking one point that I want to stress today, it's that the U.S. empire is really good at destroying foreign countries, bombing them, sabotaging their economy, imposing sanctions that are devastating. The U.S. empire is awful at actually creating stability. And of course, I don't think the U.S. cares about stability in these areas that it's destabilizing. It's fine with destabilization. The U.S. would rather have a destabilized region than have independent governments that resist its global empire. We saw this in Syria. We saw this in Libya. We saw this in Iraq. We saw this in Afghanistan. The U.S. is totally fine with instability and chaos and de-development because it also, is very profitable for the U.S. military-industrial complex. And now that the U.S. is doing it in Latin America, it's going to cause even more repercussions back at home because the U.S. has mostly been, in the past few decades, been bombing and destabilizing countries in West Asia and South Asia. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Syria. this caused a massive refugee crisis, and most of those refugees and migrants, well, not most, but many of them went to Europe. Most of them ended up going to Iran and Turkey and Pakistan, but many of them, millions of them, went to Europe and caused a refugee crisis, which also led to the rise of far-right political movements. Well, now the U.S. is once again destabilizing Venezuela and carrying out this barbaric medieval siege of Cuba to try to destroy the Cuban economy, to starve millions of Cuban civilians. And that's also going to probably create another massive refugee crisis. So, the U.S. has been really good at destabilizing countries on the other side of the world, and now it's doing it more directly in the Western Hemisphere. And once again, arrogantly assuming there will be no consequences.
Minister to the trilateral talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, and the movement of those talks from Abu Dhabi to Geneva?
Not really. There's been a lot of talk in the media that the appointment of Vladimir Medinsky to head the Russian delegation means that the Russians are toughening their position. There's a feeling that the Russians think they're on the threshold of victory, and now is not the time to compromise. And if anything, what they want to do is broaden the agenda and play hardball with the Ukrainians and with the United States. But to me, this has been a kabuki dance, or it's been kabuki theater from the beginning, and nothing has changed. The key issue is, what do Russian demands look like? What are the Ukrainians and the Europeans willing to concede on vis-a-vis those demands? And you just see that there's a huge gulf between the two sides. So whoever's in the driver's seat on either side doesn't matter. The fact is that the terms that each side is willing to accept are irreconcilable.
Yeah, the chief Ukrainian negotiator, who's the head of their intelligence services, the Russians have accused him of masterminding the murder of a Russian general and the attempted murder of another Russian general. One wonders if the negotiations were moved from Abu Dhabi and its relative neutrality to Geneva and its absolute neutrality.
It's possible, but I think where it takes place just doesn't matter very much. Because again, the key question is whether or not you have any reasonable chance of fashioning a deal where both sides make compromises and what the outcome is acceptable to both sides. So you can have it in Abu Dhabi, you can have it in Geneva, you can have it on the moon. It just doesn't matter.
Does Russia have any incentive to give in on anything?
No, I don't think so. I think it's very clear that the Russians are doing well on the battlefield. The spring is coming, and they are well prepared for a major offensive. They've been blasting the electrical grid in Ukraine to the point where it's almost completely wrecked. And I think most importantly, it's quite clear that the Americans are no longer interested in supporting Ukraine in any meaningful way. And the Europeans can't make up for the loss of American support. So that means overall Western support for Ukraine is going down at a critical juncture in the war. So it's just hard to tell a story about how Ukraine improves its situation on the battlefield. And if anything, it looks like Ukraine which is reeling from attacks on the battlefield anyway, is only going to be in a worse position over the next year. So I think from a Russian point of view, the smart thing to do is just to continue to push on as you have in the past.
So it's just a matter of time before the Ukrainian military either doesn't exist or gives up the ghost.
That's my view. I think that, in a war of attrition like this, the two sides, they stand toe to toe for a long period of time, and each side tries to bleed the other white. And then at some point, one side collapses. This is what you saw happen in World War I. You had the Germans on one side, and the French and the British on the other side. And then eventually the Americans came in as well. And the two sides were just standing toe to toe, pounding each other. There was very little movement on the ground. But eventually the Germans reached the point where they were bled white and they quit. It wasn't that the Allies, the Western Allies, marched into Germany. In fact, the Western Allies never set foot in Germany until the war was ended. Because it was a war of attrition. And this is basically what you have here. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how long can the Ukrainians last?
It was also a war where they had the thing Christmas Eve and Christmas Day truces, and they actually dined with each other. And then the next day went back to trying to kill each other. It was an entirely different world, obviously. Do you place any significance in the recent use by Foreign Minister Lavrov and other senior Russian officials, including President Putin, of the phrase Novorossiya, the new Russia, to describe all of those oblasts, starting with the Crimea in the south and going up to Kherson? I think I have the geography right, in the north.
Hi, my name is Tami, and I would like to give you a few reasons why you should consider.
Yeah, I think it's Kharkiv in the north. Kherson is just above the Crimean Peninsula. I think the really interesting question here is how many oblasts to the west of the 4 oblasts they have already annexed the Russians will try to take. I've long argued that it was in Ukraine's interest to settle this war now, because they've only lost 4 oblasts plus Crimea. Of course, the Ukrainians would recoil at my use of the word only. But the problem is that if the Russians do win on the battlefield, as I was describing it before, the Russians are likely to take more territory. And they're likely to take oblasts like Odessa and Kharkiv. And this would be even more disastrous for Ukraine. But if you're the Russians and you think about where this war is headed, and that is that you're going to get some sort of frozen conflict, some sort of armistice, you're not going to get a meaningful peace agreement. And that means you're going to have poisonous relations between Russia on one side and the West on the other side, plus Ukraine, for as far as the eye can see. You then have, as the Russians, a powerful incentive to, number one, grab as much territory as you can, to position yourself for this long war, even though it'll be a Cold War once the armistice is set in place, and also to go to great lengths to make Ukraine a dysfunctional rump state so that it can't join NATO and it's not any kind of a threat to you. And if you take Odessa, for example, you basically take away the Black Sea coastline from the Ukrainians, which will hobble their economy in very important ways.
Well, they'll be totally landlocked, won't they?
Yes, they will. And that will be disastrous for them. And again, this is why I think if the Ukrainians were smart, they would have cut a deal already. Now, one would say that's a terrible deal, to which I would say, you're correct. It's a terrible deal, but it's the least bad deal you can get.
Right. The deal that had been negotiated and more or less agreed to, that 126-page document in Istanbul, if I have all this correct, in 2022, the deal that Joe Biden and Boris Johnson and Secretary of Defense at the time, Lloyd Austin, talked President Zelensky out of, would have been a much better deal than what they'll end up with now, would it not? In terms of the retention of land?
Oh, there's no question about that. There's just no question about that. The Russians at that point in time had not annexed any of the 4 oblasts. This is, in the March, April 2022 period, right after the war had started, these negotiations began. And the Russians, they had annexed Crimea, and Crimea was lost. But these 4 oblasts that they've now annexed were not annexed at the time. And I think if the Ukrainians had been really flexible, they could have worked out an agreement with the Russians where they kept all 4 of those oblasts, including the 2 oblasts that are in the Donbass. But they would have certainly not lost as much territory as they now have lost. And then again, as we were saying a few minutes ago, the really interesting question at this point is whether or not they lose any further oblasts, including places like Odessa and Kharkiv.
Wow. Before we go to Iran and whatever Donald Trump plans to do, how different would the U.S.-Iran relationship be, the U.S.-Israeli relationship be, the Israeli relationship to the Middle East be, if Palestine were a free state?
And when you say if Palestine were a free state, that can have 2 meanings. Do you mean there were a 2-state solution and you had a Palestinian state and an Israeli state?
Yes.
Well, assuming that that was done in a way that produced a peaceful outcome, that this Palestinian state and this Israeli state could live side by side, the Middle East would be much more peaceful. There's no question about that. U.S.-Iranian relations and Israeli-Iranian relations are another matter. One could argue that if you had a 2-state solution and Iran still had a nuclear enrichment capability, still had ballistic missiles, then Israel would have its gun sights on Iran, and therefore the United States would have its gun sights on Iran. So one could argue that Iran is a somewhat separate issue from the Palestinian issue. But, linking that to the war in Ukraine, that would have no effect. What happens in the Middle East would have no effect on the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has a life of its own. And you remember the war in Ukraine was going on before October 7th, and all the big troubles started in the Middle East. However, one could argue that if you look at what's happening in Iran, the Russians and especially the Chinese are tightening their relationship with Iran. I think when you and I are talking about the Iranian mess, this Iranian crisis a year from now, and we probably will be talking about it a year from now, I think China and Russia will be much bigger factors in the equation than they are now. We don't spend that much time talking about the China-Russia dimension of the conflict in Iran, but that's beginning to change. You can see all sorts of evidence of that. So one could argue that in terms of Russia and China, even if you settle the Palestinian conflict, if you don't settle the Iran conflict, you're going to have big trouble down the road involving the 3 great powers in the Middle East.
Well,
just build an app without form? Well, let me show you how to brand your app with a custom header. So,
the situation in Iran, what can Trump possibly hope to achieve diplomatically?
Well, I've been thinking about this in anticipation of the show. I think if it was just the United States, just Trump and the Iranians, you could work out a deal. I think that you could get some new variant of the JCPOA that could be dressed up as a great improvement on that. And I think the United States could live with some nuclear enrichment capability on the part of the Iranians. And then the Iranians are floating all sorts of proposals that have an economic dimension, how the United States and Iran can get rich together and so forth and so on, that would, I think, be attractive to President Trump. And Trump, I don't think, is enthusiastic about starting another forever war in Iran. So I think if it's just the United States and Iran, you could work out a deal. And by the way, as you like to say, and I agree 100% with what you say, Iran does not present a threat to the United States. That's the starting point. It's not a threat to the United States. So you ought to be able to work out a deal. But the problem here is it's not just the United States, or it's just not the Trump administration and the Iranians. It's the Israelis as well. And the Israelis have a set of demands that go well beyond putting limits on the nuclear enrichment capability. And there's no way the Iranians are ever going to agree to those Israeli demands.
Is the Iranian set of negotiations also a kabuki dance?
Yeah, there's just no question about it. I see no way you're going to work that one out.
Well, do you think that Trump has decided already whether or not he's going to attack, whether it's to please Netanyahu, to please the lobby in the United States, or because he honestly thinks this will bring about a resolution to whatever?
I don't know what he's thinking. I think that he's really boxed himself in here. The problem is it's virtually impossible for any president, including Donald Trump, to ignore what Israel wants. And Israel wants zero enrichment capability. They want the whole nuclear enrichment infrastructure taken down. They want Iran to eliminate all the ballistic missiles it has that can hit Israel. They want Iran to give up supporting the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. And these are demands that there's no way the Iranians are going to accept. So even if Trump can work out a deal that's satisfactory to him along the lines I described before, it's not going to satisfy the Israelis. And the Israelis have made it very clear that they will attack Iran alone if that is necessary. And of course, if they attack Iran, there's no way we don't get involved, because we're going to then have to help defend Israel when the Iranians start launching ballistic missiles at Israel. And also, we're going to get involved because the Iranians are in all likelihood going to try to shut down the Straits of Hormuz and stop the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. So I don't see what Trump can do. And just to take it a step further, as you and I have talked about, he can attack, Trump can have U.S. forces attack Iran, but that doesn't solve the problem. It's not going to get rid of the ballistic missiles. It's not going to cause regime change. It's not going to end Iranian support for Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. So we don't have a military option here. So
I've asked this before. Why is it that Iran, which has signed the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, is not permitted to have a nuclear weapon, and Israel, which has not signed that treaty, is permitted to have a nuclear weapon? Can anybody explain that?
Yeah, I can explain it to you. It's very simple. Israel has a special relationship with the United States that has no parallel in history. Israel can do pretty much anything it wants, and we will give it unconditional support. With regard to all the countries that live in Israel's neighborhood, Israel basically dictates to us that we have to go to enormous lengths to make sure they have no nuclear weapons of their own, or even a nuclear enrichment capability, as we have been talking about, and that those countries kowtow to Israel. And we go to great lengths to help Israel achieve those goals. That's what's going on here. You just have to understand that there's a special relationship here between the United States and Israel that has no parallel in recorded history.
Here, this is just in from the Hindustan Times about 30 minutes ago. Iran has sent shockwaves through global markets by declaring a round-the-clock surveillance lockdown over the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point carrying nearly 1/5 of the world's daily oil flow. The IRGC Navy, that's the Iranian Navy, announced full spectrum monitoring across surface vessels, drones, even submarines during intense naval drills in and around the Straits of Hormuz. So the Chinese import 1.4 million barrels of oil from Iran a day. Are they just going to sit back and allow the Iranian leadership to be toppled if Netanyahu and Trump attack?
No, they're going to go to great lengths to help Iran. And as I said to you before, with the passage of time, the Chinese especially, but also the Russians, are going to help the Iranians more and more. And that's why I said to you a year from now, when we're talking about this issue, right, it will be clear that the China-Russia dimension will be more important then than it is now. But it's already important now. I want to make one other quick point to you, just to put this whole crisis in perspective. I believe that virtually every country in the Middle East, except maybe the UAE, which is pretty closely allied with Israel, but virtually every other country in the Middle East, plus the Chinese, plus the Russians, want this war to not happen. The only country that really wants it to happen is Israel. As we've talked about, the Americans really don't want this war. Trump doesn't want to fight a war against Iran. He's being pushed down this road by the Israelis. So you see the remarkable power of Israel simply because.
Let this small device sit in your home to generate clean, free energy and never worry.
It has such a hold over American policymakers. Just think about it. Every country in the Middle East, except maybe the UAE, is desperate to avoid this war. The Chinese and the Russians don't want this war. Trump really doesn't want this war. Who wants this war? Benjamin Netanyahu.
Wow. Will he get the war that he wants?
Boy, it's very hard to say. I go back and forth on this one. On one hand, I say, this war can't happen because we can't achieve our goals by striking Iran. And furthermore, you have to take into account what Iran can do in retaliation. You were just talking about the Straits of Hormuz and what the consequences would be if that one heated up. And of course, the Iranians are going to launch ballistic missiles at Israel as well. So it's hard to see why it makes sense to start this war from a purely strategic point of view. But then it looks like Trump has boxed himself in. And furthermore, the Israelis appear to be putting enormous pressure on him to go to war against Iran. And, you know, can he disobey his masters? I don't think so. So that pushes me in the other direction. So I feel one day war is inevitable because of pressure from the Israelis. And the next day, I think it's not going to happen because I can't tell a story as to how a war leads to some sort of happy ending for all the parties.
Don't the Israelis, with their intel and military superiority, or at least accomplished excellence from their perspective, understand how devastating to Israel this war would be? Don't they understand the power of the Iranian offensive weaponry?
Well, you remember that on January 14th, they, in the form of Prime Minister Netanyahu, asked President Trump not to attack Iran because they were fearful of the ballistic missile attack. And they're now deeply interested in making sure that Iran's ballistic missile inventory is reduced to the point where it can't hit Israel, because they're fully aware just how dangerous this ballistic missile threat is. But having said all that, it looks like they see this at this point in time is an opportunity for the United States to blast Iran and eliminate its ballistic missile capability once and for all. And at the same time, although the Iranians will retaliate against Israel with their own ballistic missiles, we have enough defensive systems in the Middle East, along with the Israelis, various defensive systems that we can together handle the ballistic missiles that come in from Iran. I think that's their thinking. And this is, in other words, this is a window of opportunity. The problem's only going to get worse with the passage of time. But I actually think that what will happen here is you will not destroy their ballistic missile capability once and for all. I don't see how that's possible. I can't even imagine a plausible story. You may inflict significant damage on that ballistic missile force, the Iranian ballistic missile force, with an attack in the next month or so, but you're not going to eliminate it forever. It's going to come back. And furthermore, I believe in this conflict, should it happen, I think the Iranians will launch a significant number of ballistic missiles at Iran, and a good number of them will get through, just as happened last year.
You said at Iran, you meant at Israel.
Excuse me, at Israel. Yeah, just as happened in the 12-day war.
In the 12-day war, reportedly, Netanyahu begged Trump to stop so that the Iranians would stop.
Yes, that's true. And you also want to remember that we were running out of defensive missiles. We used up about a quarter of our THAAD missiles in the 12-day war. And furthermore, we were spooked by the fact that it looked like the Iranians were moving to close the Straits of Hormuz. This was in June of last year. And Trump did not want that to happen. And one would think Trump does not want that to happen today. And one would think that that's why the Iranians are conducting live fire exercises now in the Straits of Hormuz, because they're sending a signal to Trump that if the United States or Israel or both of them attack Iran, the Iranians will close the straits. And Trump does not want that to happen.
Agreed. Professor Mearsheimer, thank you very much, my dear friend. Thank you.
Do not pay your car insurance bill. I repeat, do not pay your bill yet. So I found this website and look at the difference.
Cuba's fuel tanks are running dry, and Moscow is stepping in. As Havana warns international airlines that jet fuel can no longer be guaranteed, Russia is preparing to send crude oil and refined fuel to the island in the near future as humanitarian aid, according to the Russian embassy in Cuba, cited by Izvestia. The crisis follows intensified U.S. measures aimed at choking off Venezuelan oil exports, Cuba's main energy lifeline. Shipments from Caracas have stalled since mid-December, triggering severe shortages. Airports are running out of jet fuel, transport networks are strained, and the island's energy security is under pressure. Izvestia reports Russia last supplied Cuba with oil in February 2025, delivering 100,000 metric tons. Now, with conditions worsening, Moscow appears ready to resume deliveries, framing the move as humanitarian assistance. The Kremlin stopped short of confirming shipment details, but acknowledged active discussions. We are in close contact with our Cuban friends, spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, adding that Russia does not seek escalation with Washington. He noted that trade between Russia and the United States remains limited.
We wouldn't want any escalation, but on the other hand, we don't have much trade with the United States right now. We'd probably count on constructive dialogue and a solution to existing problems through dialogue.
Moscow has accused the U.S. of trying to suffocate Cuba's economy and pledged solidarity with Havana and Caracas. Russia also announced it would suspend flights to Cuba once Russian tourists depart, citing the deteriorating fuel situation. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova alleged that external forces are worsening the crisis to provoke public dissatisfaction. For Cuba, the emergency is immediate.
We suspect that actions by external forces seeking to aggravate the energy crisis in near Cuba, including the suspension of air connections to the island, are geared towards, among other things, provoking the dissatisfaction of the population and foreign citizens who experience inconveniences in this context.
For Russia and the United States, it may mark another geopolitical flashpoint, where oil becomes both lifeline and leverage.
A thing called siege warfare. That's a international war crime. They've cut off all the fuel. They've sanctioned every country if you do business with them, meaning if you trade with Cuba, if you send them medicine, if you send them food, if you send them baby formula. Russia is going to supply Cuba with oil. So Trump is strangling Cuba. They're doing a thing called siege warfare. That's a international war crime. They've cut off all the fuel. They've sanctioned every country if you do business with them, meaning if you trade with Cuba, if you send them medicine, if you send them food, if you send them baby formula, if you send them fuel, if you send them oil, if you do anything, the United States is going to crush you economically, right? Because we are the reserve currency of the world. We have that power. We still sanction people. And so now countries are lining up to blockade them. So Alan says during COVID, Cuba did nothing but help other countries around the world, often for free. They would export their doctors. Now those same countries are lining up to impose U.S. blockade on it. Shameful Slavish servants of empire. And Marco Rubio is the one really pushing this, and that's why he's in there. He's in there because the Zionists wanted him in there, and Trump is nothing but a cuck to Zionists and Israel. So Marco Rubio is deliberately blocking Trump from Cuba talks. The Secretary of State has told the president that talks are happening with high-level Cuban officials. No such talks exist. Purported negotiations in Mexico, actual fake news. When it comes to Trump's claims of those talks, it turns out he's lying. Instead, it turns out he isn't lying about those talks. Instead, sources tell DropSite he's being lied to. He's saying that because that's what Marco Rubio is telling him, said a senior Trump official, referring to an internal effort by Secretary of State Marco Rubio to make Trump believe that the U.S. and Cuba are engaged in serious negotiations without ever doing so. The idea, the source said, is that in a few weeks or months, Rubio will be able to claim that the talks were futile because of Cuban intransigence. With diplomatic off-ramps being blocked, this would make Rubio's vision of regime change the only path forward for an administration loath to reverse course on anything. So what they're doing now now the United States, they're being crushed, right? The U.S. is crushed. The people they don't have food, they don't have fuel, they can't run their hospitals, they can't run their schools. They don't have food, they have nothing. They don't have money they don't have energy to light their street lights, nothing. So we're doing exactly what Israel does to the Gazans. Instead of wiping them out all completely, we give them just enough so they don't starve completely. The U.S. is sending small fuel shipment to Cuba after blockading the island supply, cooking gas, diesel, to keep water flowing. So you got to have power or else people don't have drinking water and then you die immediately. So they're making sure just we're suffocating them, but not to the point of mass death. But let's remember, Cuba are the ones that support terrorism. We're the terrorists. We're the terrorists. Wow. Like the U.S. is taking a page out of the Israelis' playbook. Control everything in and out of Cuba, just like Israel does control everything in and out of Gaza, which is why they can starve them. They can cut off their water, cut off their fuel, cut off everything. So guess who's coming to the rescue? Russia. Russia is going to supply Cuba with oil. Russia is preparing to send a shipment of oil and petroleum products to Cuba. Moscow's embassy in Havana has announced. The island is facing its worst energy crisis in years after the U.S. doubled down on its campaign to cut off its energy supplies. The fuel crisis intensified dramatically after U.S. forces kidnapped, thank God somebody's using the real language, the kidnapped Venezuelan President Maduro in early January, severing oil supplies from Caracas, which had been one of Cuba's main suppliers. Washington subsequently threatened to impose tariffs on any country providing oil to Cuba, with Mexico later suspending crude shipments to the island. So even Mexico's knuckling under. The U.S. itself has maintained an economic embargo on Cuba since the 1960s. The Russian embassy in Cuba confirmed that the Caribbean island is facing an acute shortage of oil and petroleum products, adding that while the crisis has lasted for more than a year, the stop of supplies from Venezuela has aggravated the situation. The embassy said it is planning to send oil and petroleum products to Cuba in the near future as humanitarian aid, though without specifying the time frame or the volumes. Cuba is believed to be down to just 3 months' reserves of oil supplies, while shipping from Russia to Cuba generally takes approximately 40 to 50 days. For a sea freight, that's ocean cargo, including loading and unloading times. The last major Russian oil delivery to Cuba occurred in February 2025 when Moscow sent 100,000 tons through a state credit worth U.S. $60 million approved by President Vladimir Putin. Cuba is estimated to consume 500 to 600 tons of fuel per day for its most critical needs, and it requires over 8 million tons of fuel per year to function normally. In addition, Russian officials reported that Moscow is assisting Cuba in developing its domestic oil reserves. While the island's proven crude oil reserves are officially around 120 million barrels, the offshore zone of the North Cuba Basin is estimated to hold up to 20 billion barrels, or the equivalent of about 146 billion tons, enough to satisfy Cuba's domestic needs for 650 years.
Have you been wondering how people turn side hustles into full-blown online businesses?
China is also assisting by installing extensive solar power projects, aiming to build 92 solar parks by 2028 and add 2,000 megawatts to the grid. 92 solar parks. The initiative, largely financed via Chinese development credits, features Yangtze Ecology and Energy Development Company building infrastructure, with the first major projects already connected to the grid in early 2025, thus reducing Cuba's dependence on U.S.-controlled oil supplies. Moscow has condemned the U.S. pressure campaign on Cuba as economic strangulation and neocolonial practice, while reaffirming solidarity with the island. Mexico has also defied Washington by sending oil supplies to Cuba. Well, now I'm getting contradictory, because earlier in the article they said they stopped. So maybe they have stopped, but earlier they were doing that. U.S. President Donald Trump said last month that the pressure campaign would force the Cuban leadership to come to us and want to make a deal, claiming that the island would be free again. Wow. However, when Trump says he wants Cuba to come make a deal, he means turn the country over to U.S. economic hitmen. That's what he means. He certainly doesn't mean install democracy, because the last thing the United States likes are countries that have democracy that can vote their way out of an imperial situation. They like strong men. The United States, we like strong men and dictators. That's what we like doing business with. And often we'll overthrow democratically elected governments and install a puppet, a strong man, like Pinochet, like we did in Chile. However, humanitarian concerns are rising globally as Cuban hospitals are now having to close. They're closing hospitals. So the same thing they did, we're not bombing their hospitals like Israel did in Gaza, but we're just starving them of power so they can't function. Water supplies are turned off due to lack of fuel for pumping both fresh and sewage water. And the threat of major pandemics such as cholera increases, with Washington likely to be seen as culpable if this does happen. Well, they're trying to keep it just below a mass killing. Just below. And I'll show you here's the solar panels that China's sending them. They went from 5.8% of their electricity coming from solar to 20.3% in 1 year. They have 49 Chinese parks on the grid, going up to 92. So hopefully they can get it up to around 40%, maybe 50% of their electricity coming from solar. Not a bad idea. So again, this is Trump doing the exact opposite. If you think this is a good thing or this is going to help American citizens, it's not. This is just us being terrorists. This is called terrorism. This is us using violence. This is economic violence, starving people, making them close their hospitals. They can't get running water. They can't get their street lights on at night. They can't get traffic lights on. They can't do anything. They can't have refrigerators running for food. They can't do anything. So this is economic violence for a political outcome, and that's the definition of terrorism. And so, again, the United States are the terrorists, just like we are, just like we were in Iraq, just like we were in Libya, just like we were in Somalia, just like we were in Syria, in Yemen, in Iran, just like we're in Afghanistan, now just like we were in Venezuela, and now we are in Cuba. Not going to be, we are. We're doing it. This is the same kind of illegal siege warfare, which is a war crime that Israel does to the Gazans. We're doing it to Cuba. And thank God for Russia. I hope they get their oil there soon. And this is, Trump really ratcheting up, getting ready for World War III. Because remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? So this is going to be very similar. Yeah. Okay. If you'd like to hear me tell jokes about this sad situation, come see me in
It's the legend himself, Jimmy Dore, political commentator, comedian, host of the Jimmy Dore Show, and one day, I hope, a candidate for the presidency of the United States of America. I tried my best to get him to run last time, but he declined. Maybe he saw what was coming. Jimmy, welcome back after too long to the show. Let me get straight into it, given the hour. The appearance of Ghislaine Maxwell in the week has excited even me to question whether that was really her. No matter how much prison pasta she's been feasting on, it wouldn't have changed the shape of her nose, the length of her nose, the space between her eyes. Now, it would have seemed like an insane question for me to ask and you to answer only a few short months ago. But now we know what we know about the Epstein affair. Anything's possible, isn't it?
100% anything's possible, including Jeffrey Epstein is still alive, is very much possible. In fact, it seems probable that he's alive. As my co-host Kurt Metzger says, if Jeffrey Epstein's dead, that means he worked for the Mossad. But if he's alive, that means the Mossad worked for him and he worked for the Rothschilds, which we know. You know, he got appointed to the Trilateral Commission when he was like 29 years old. And we all know that he's a mediocre mind. He's not a brilliant financial guy that people made him out to be. And the picture, so we now know also that there was I think it was a Reddit post, and the Reddit post is tied directly back to a guard at the prison where Epstein was being held. And he said that they came and took him out the night before his death, that they sent a van. And the van didn't have any of the paperwork. You normally have a transport van, and the transport van never comes on a weekend. And so so this has been tracked directly behind him, directly to that guard. Also, we know the video surveillance has big gaps in it, and you can see people walking up, going to his cell. So also, if you look at, people have done this comparison of the picture of Jeffrey Epstein that's supposedly Jeffrey Epstein dead, and the picture of Jeffrey Epstein alive, and it doesn't match up. His nose doesn't match up. His earlobes don't match up. So is it very possible that he's alive? Yes, it's very possible that he's alive, and it's very possible that Ghislaine is not in prison. I immediately suspected that. Like, how do we know she's in prison? How do we know how long she's in prison? So there's been no explanation or given for why she was transferred to the minimum security prison that she was transferred to, which she's not supposed to be. So again, there's nothing that you can imagine that isn't possible.
Well, I cited one. Of course, there are thousands, and I haven't read them all, but I've read more than most people have. But the one that grabbed me just this day was one of the top princes of the international banking system is thanking Epstein in writing for the Snow White experience that Epstein had just provided him. Snow White, of course, story of a very young girl. And then we see the receipts for a Snow White costume for a young girl that Jeffrey Epstein had purchased, leaving any rational person to wonder darkly, where is the Snow White? What happened to the Snow White for whom that Snow White costume was bought? And why was a prince of JP Morgan and Barclays Bank thanking Epstein for the Snow White experience. I mean, maybe he just liked Disney, and maybe he just loved the movie. Maybe he's like one of these Rocky Horror Show people that, likes to get dressed up to get into the experience. But maybe it's something very much darker than that.
Sounds like it. I also would like to know what they mean every time you see pizza and grape soda. That obviously doesn't mean pizza and grape soda. And used to be called a crazy person if you questioned why those two terms kept showing up in the Podesta emails. You were considered a crazy person. And of course, now here they are showing up in the Epstein emails. But the thing that's interesting to me, or probably the most frustrating thing to me, is that in the United States, no one is getting in trouble for this stuff. There's nobody has to step down. The Commerce Secretary is caught telling an elaborate lie about not knowing Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, then it shows up that not only did he know Jeffrey Epstein and hang out with Jeffrey Epstein, he actually was on his island, brought his kids to the island, and then also was in business with him. So that's the current Commerce Secretary, who, by the way, lived next door to Jeffrey Epstein. And so there's nobody here in the United States that's had to step down from their position or been fired. It's happening in other parts of the world, Europe, even I think Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, maybe. And but so other people are getting in trouble, but it doesn't seem like anybody, there's no consequences. People might get a little embarrassed, like Bill Gates, but there's nothing going to happen to Bill Gates. There's nothing going to happen to the people that are in the files in the United States anyway. And I find that maddening.
Well, the casualty rate is definitely growing elsewhere. The former prime minister, the immediate past prime minister of Norway, at the top of the Norwegian political Christmas tree for decades, is now under arrest this evening. He was taken away by police on corruption charges directly relating to Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Mandelson, our erstwhile ambassador, a former deputy prime minister in Britain, and a cabinet minister in 3 governments, sacked from 2 of them, but inexplicably reinstated to the 3rd, and then by a 4th, given the position of ambassador to Washington. He's in very serious trouble now. He has just been caught lying about the purchase of a £2 million apartment in Rio de Janeiro, which he said he had no recollection of. It's the kind of thing you can easily forget, right, Jimmy? And then the Financial Times turned up the documents with his signature on them, with a Cayman Islands company arranging the financing of the purchase of a £2 million apartment in Rio that he had no recollection of. And that's only the half of it. Insider trading, giving Epstein advance notice of market-sensitive information that came to him as a government minister, and so on. He's definitely heading for jail. So there's a prime minister and a deputy prime minister going to prison. Princes and princesses of the royal houses of Europe, countesses. I mean, their crowns are falling off them, Jimmy. So why are the American people not demanding some condign punishment of their Epstein class?
I think because we're in the end stage republic and our country's crumbling from corruption. Donald, no kidding. I mean, nobody's ever had to pay a price for anything. Nobody paid a price for 9/11. Nobody paid a price. Now we know that Building 7 was imploded and we were lied to, that they blew that building up. That didn't fall down because of planes. Nobody paid a price for that. They ordered a torture program at the top of government after 9/11 that was worldwide. Barack Obama knew about it. It was the only person who went to jail for ordering a worldwide torture program was the guy who disclosed it, the guy who uncovered it from the CIA, John Kiriakou. So nobody, and Barack Obama famously said all those torture crimes happened in the past, and he was looking towards the future. I don't know if anybody ever told him, but all crimes happen in the past. That's where they all happen. And anyway, so he didn't prosecute anybody. So nobody went to jail for 9/11. Nobody went to jail for the the stock market crash in 2008. Nobody went to jail for ordering a torture program. Nobody went to jail for what we did to Libya, which was illegal. Nobody went to jail for the illegal war in that killed 1 million people in Iraq. Nobody's going to war for funding Al Qaeda in Syria. Nobody's going to jail. Nobody gets in trouble for anything in the United States. It's a complete two-tier justice system, and the connected, wealthy elite don't go to jail. That's just the way it is. And nobody in America, because they own the media, right? So because Zionists also control the corporate media in the United States, the corporate media is not going to create a groundswell. They're not going to create momentum for people to get arrested or lose their job, because they've been downplaying this Epstein Files thing forever. They've been downplaying Epstein Files, everything at the behest of Israel, right? And so I think that's a big reason why nothing's happening here. But you know, it's considered anti-Semitic for me to say that Zionists control our media, but so be it. Zionists do control our media. Is definitely deferential to the Zionist narrative and to Israel.
Well, Jimmy, they certainly control the so-called legacy media, but it's crashing and burning. They've put a fortune into CBS, appointing pro-Israel stooges, and their audience is disappearing like snow in a thaw. Jimmy Dore gets a bigger audience than Barry Weiss. In fact, George Galloway gets a bigger audience, and I'm not even American, than Barry Weiss. Jimmy Dore's show is outperforming most shows on American mainstream media. And Joe Rogan, of course, bigger than both of us put together. Far, far more people are paying attention to independent media now than to the official media. So we ought to be able to see a change begin, oughtn't we?
I would hope so. You know, that's my wish, my hope. But of course, it turns out there's a lot of people in independent media. So I mean, so the Zionists and the corporations and the war machine, they've captured the legacy media, the corporate media. Why would they stop there? Why wouldn't they go after independent media, which is exactly what they've done? And so they've co-opted at least half the independent media, if not more, that are on the payroll of a Zionist or on the payroll of a political organization or the military industrial complex or whoever it is. And they're doing the bidding of the establishment, the oligarchs, just like the legacy media does. And so that's kind of stopping. You know, that's certainly slowing progress. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that's going to change things for the better in the United States is a real revolution. I don't know how that's going to show up, but you know, whether it be nonviolent or whether it be violent. I mean, our country was founded on a violent revolution. You know, when the government got the last time the government got this unresponsive to its electorate and its citizens, George Washington picked up a gun and started shooting his oppressors. So I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that's what happened. So we need some kind of a revolution in the United States. Unfortunately, independent media, I think it's making a big mark and it's putting pressure on people, but it's just not the thing that's going to move the needle here in the United States to a point that we need it to be moved to.
Now, right this evening, the people in Iran are braced for a major war, which could turn out to be a real catastrophic, even intercontinental war, certainly across the whole of the Middle East. The Iranian people believe, Professor Marandi, known to both of us, effectively left a kill switch on social media this evening. He said, if the Epstein regime attacks us, I will continue to broadcast if I can stay online. But if I am incapacitated, if I'm killed, and he then gave another name of one of his colleagues, try following him. And if he's incapacitated, here's somebody else. That's the stage we're at. Is Donald Trump really going to do this? Or was Benjamin Netanyahu disappointed in his visit, his 7th visit to Washington in just over a year?
Well, if past his prologue, Donald Trump is going to do whatever Benjamin Netanyahu and his Zionist donors like Miriam Edelson want him to do. I also think that, there's still 3 million files that have not been released. And I'm sure Israel knows about any of the compromising material that on Donald Trump that would be in there. I'm sure they have copies of it. And a lot of people said that when they released the birthday card that Donald Trump sent to Jeffrey Epstein, that got released through, I think, the New York Times. And people are like, well, who do you think leaked it to the New York Times? So people were speculating that that was Israel, and they were upset that Donald Trump was.
Switch to TurboTax. File free in the app by 2/20.
Wasn't bombing enough for them, and that he wouldn't go full out war with Iran, and that was their way to kind of pressure him. And so, they've already pressured him into bombing Iran, the bombing Yemen. They're already pressured into welcoming a guy who was the head chopper at Al Qaeda in Syria to the White House. Now we're in bed with them, with Al Qaeda for legit, for real. As we still have the Guantanamo torture prison open, the United States does. We're welcoming, which is supposed to be filled with terrorists. We're welcoming the head terrorist from Syria. So my point is that Donald Trump will do anything that he's told to do. And here's an interesting thing. He almost brags that Miriam Adelson gave him a couple of $100 million for his campaign. And he tells these stories about how the Adelsons would always pester him and come to the White House, and they would always want something else, and then he would give it to him. He even brags that he gave him the Golan Heights. He goes, they didn't even ask for it. I gave it to him. And so I go, even for Donald Trump, that is weird for him to brag about how compromised he is because of money. And I think the only reason he's doing that is to distract everybody from how they really have him compromised. And Israel has him compromised with blackmail. And so he wants everybody to think he's doing all this stuff because of the money. He's not that embarrassed about being bought off money. He's a billionaire. He likes money. He likes transactional activities. And so that's why. So it's so over the top that he literally brags that he's been bought by Miriam Adelson and that she can get whatever she wants out of him, that it's suspect. And so my suspicions is that he's going to do whatever Benjamin Netanyahu wants because they'd have him. Donald Trump is not the boss. Donald Trump has handlers and they have blackmail on him. And so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that he doesn't go through with this. So Charlie Kirk, I think that was I don't know if people know who Charlie Kirk was, but he was the leader of the Turning Points USA organization, which was credited with getting Donald Trump elected. And Charlie Kirk was told, I'm told, yelled at Donald Trump not to go to war with Iran. And if he did, it would be a big mistake. And he had also turned against Israel, and then he was killed. So I think they're getting people out of the way, and they're opening a lane for Donald Trump to go in and do war. I think this is the last country on the list that Israel has been wanting the United States to invade and bomb and overthrow. I think we did Iraq, we did Syria, we bombed Yemen, we did Libya. Now Lebanon. They're doing Iran. I think Iran's the last one on the list. So or maybe the Sudan. Yeah. And it looks like the Greater Israel Project is about expanding Israel, and that's about taking over parts of Syria, parts of Lebanon, all of Gaza and the West Bank, parts of even Egypt. But so they've always wanted to destabilize every country around them, and now they've got it done. So they decapitated Libya. It's a failed state. Iraq, same thing. Syria, the same thing. Now they're going in to do it to Iran. I mean, it's they don't make a secret of it, what's happening and why they're doing these things. And so this is the last war that Israel wants the United States to do for them, and Donald Trump is going to do it for them because he's compromised.
Well, the blowback from it may very well be fatal for many far beyond the theater of conflict. Now, you're on tour. I keep reading these wonderful venues that you're appearing in, Jimmy. How's the tour going? Where are you next?
The tour's going great. We're going to be in Lansing, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Then we'll be in Houston.
You rail against mainstream media, legacy media all the time. But guys, I didn't think that they were part of an active cover-up. Like I thought they got all their framing wrong, and it was partly because of the pressures and the different things that happen, like the advertisers, a lot of them are politicians and big pharma and defense contractors. I've explained to you all the things that are wrong with media in 100 different ways, but even I didn't expect this. Wait, there was a shadow 9/11 commission and there's not a single national media reporter that's interested in that? I'm not going to be quiet about this. In the Epstein files, we find 2 emails that are shocking. Now you're gonna say, wait a minute, aren't all the emails shocking? I mean, there's missing babies, there's torture videos that people are talking about, girls 9, 10, 11. It just couldn't get any worse. Until you found these 2 emails. Now these are gonna make you go, wait a minute, what in the world? And these are from the Justice Department's website, from the Epstein files, emails actually sent. So first one is to Ghislaine Maxwell. It's from Ed Epstein. Okay, interesting. Well, now that's not that surprising that Ed Epstein would be talking to Ghislaine Maxwell, but what's interesting is that's January 6th of 2003. And the subject is Shadow Commission invitation. Wait, what? And they say, any interest in being on the Shadow Commission on 9/11? The membership list is secret. Ed Epstein.
Too quiet. Turn your sound from 100% to 600% with Sound Pusher. Just hit Add to Chrome.
Wait, there was a Shadow Commission? Do we know about it? I don't know about that. Did you guys know about that? And of all people in America, they were asking Ghislaine Maxwell to be on the Shadow 9/11 Commission? So did that exist? What did they decide? Did they affect the real, not the real, the apparently maybe not so real 9/11 Commission that we were spoon-fed? And who else was on this secret list that actually decided what was going to go in the 9/11 Commission report? And look, guys, at that point, even if you back in 2003, you don't know Ghislaine Maxwell's working with Jeffrey Epstein, Ed Epstein knows that she's working with Jeffrey Epstein. And let's say that he somehow miraculously doesn't know what Jeffrey and Ghislaine are up to. But Ghislaine Maxwell is Robert Maxwell's daughter. Robert Maxwell is not just a generic Israeli spy. He's the Israeli spy that stole our nuclear secrets. And you're gonna put her on a secret 9/11 Shadow Commission? And so what's amazing, the second one is email that I'm gonna share with you is arguably even more amazing. But how is this not national news everywhere? So what's happened to me in the last week or so is that my eyes have been open to how much deception is in establishment media. And if you watch the Young Turks regularly, you can say, look, Cenk, you rail against mainstream media, legacy media all the time. But guys, I didn't think that they were part of an active cover-up. Like I thought they got all their framing wrong, and it was partly because of the pressures and the different things that happen, like the advertisers, a lot of more politicians and big pharma and defense contractors. I've explained to you all the things that are wrong with media in 100 different ways, but even I didn't expect this. Wait, there was a shadow 9/11 commission and there's not a single national media reporter that's interested in that and has done a story about it. Okay, now let me give you the second email. Also to Ghislaine Maxwell, this time from a guy named Philip Levine, and God forbid anybody should ask who he is. This one's date is even more important. September 18th, 2001, a week after 9/11. And the email reads, "Where is the real pilot?" Whoa, what is that? Where's the real pilot? A week after 9/11? And that email is going to Ghislaine Maxwell. If you don't think this is an interesting story, you're not a journalist. If you're covering up this story, you're not a journalist. Well, literally no one in corporate media is covering this. So apparently there are 0 journalists in legacy media, none. I mean, but it's beyond that. There's no one who doesn't think that this is interesting. It doesn't mean that you can't disprove it. I don't know how you would, but I know what you would do. You would do investigative reporting, and you would try to figure out, wait, that's super interesting. What do they mean, real pilot? Could it be the biggest coincidence in human history that they don't mean 9/11, even though it's a week after 9/11, and you're emailing someone who's very, very likely an Israeli spy? But it's a different pilot from a different plane, maybe. But that's when you would have to do journalism and you would have to investigate it. And you would find this remarkable and you'd want to look into what the hell was the Shadow Commission? Why is someone asking Ghislaine Maxwell where the real pilot is? But we've got literally none of that from our national media. So, okay, I mean, it forces us to wonder, are you in on it? I mean, if you told me even a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the entire national media will find out that 9/11 might not have happened in the way that we think, and they'll bury it, even though it's it would be the most interesting. I mean, this has got Pulitzer Prize written all over it. The most interesting story there is, what actually happened on 9/11. And they're like, nope, we're not interested in it. No, okay, that's full mask off. I don't trust anyone in national media anymore. And I don't think it's done at the reporter level, but the editors, the publishers, the producers on cable news, the executives, so you see this and you don't do it. You forbid, I assume. I mean, is there not a single journalist who are like, guys, we got to do a report on this? Well, that would be also remarkable. My guess is there were at least a couple that were like, can we do a story on this? This looks like the most remarkable story we've ever seen. And apparently they were told, no, you're not allowed to do a story on that. That is incredibly strange. And so now I said she's almost certainly an Israeli spy, not just because her dad was the legendary spy, and not just because our government seems to be protecting Israel at every turn. I mean, again, that is remarkable. Robert Maxwell steals our nuclear secrets and then shares them with the Soviet Union to get Israel more goodies from the Soviet Union. And we don't arrest them because they say it would cause an international incident and embarrass the Israelis. Well, if you steal our nuclear secrets, of course you should be embarrassed and you should be in prison. We didn't even bother trying to arrest them. So, and then if you look at the drop site news stories, Jeffrey Epstein is procuring cyber weapons for Israel. He's doing a deal with Russia, Mongolia, African countries, all with Israel. He's donating to the IDF. He's got a IDF sweatshirt on. He goes to Israel and can meet with the prime minister anytime he wants. He has the Israeli prime minister stay at his house 30 times. He has Israeli spies stay at his house. And not one national media story about his connections to Israel and Ghislaine Maxwell's connections to Israel. I don't know that a single legacy media outlet has run a story about who Ghislaine Maxwell's dad is. Come on, how is that not interesting? No, that means you're not in the news business. You're not trying to cover the news, you're trying to cover up the news. So guys, I don't have all the answers for you here. These are 2 emails that are in the files. But I do know that I now deeply, deeply question what happened in 9/11. And I said that online today, and a whole bunch of establishment people, mainly Democrats as far as I could tell. How dare you? Oh, that is it. I'm now canceling you, and I will know you are not legitimate anymore. Hey, waiter, not legitimate, please remove him from the facilities. Brother, I've been canceled 28 times. Go for it, get in line, okay? I'm not going to be quiet about this. What do you mean, where's the real pilot? Is no one going to ask Philip Levine or Ghislaine Maxwell? What do you mean, where's the real pilot a week after 9/11? What the hell is the Shadow Commission on 9/11? Who was in it? And what did you guys decide? And how did you affect the US government? These are the most natural questions. If anybody tells you not to ask those questions, they work for another government. They don't work for us. They're not for America. They're for a different country, and a country that appears to be oppressing us. And even if they didn't do this, and they certainly did a lot of things that we've seen in the Epstein files, keep asking questions and do not be afraid to be an American. We have a right to free speech, we have a right to our opinions, and we have a right to fight for this country. And don't let anybody threaten you or intimidate you or bully you with ideas of cancellation and how you'll be forever tarred as illegitimate if you don't bow your head and stop asking questions. All right, now I want to know, where is the real pilot? Who was the real pilot, and what the hell happened on 9/11? These Epstein files have been amazing, and the last thing I'll do is a shout out to two American heroes, Ro Khanna and Tom Massey. If it wasn't for them, we would have never gotten these emails. I hope that this opens up something bigger and we find out what actually happened. But I guarantee you our entire government will try to cover it up. They've had these emails all along. They've had them since 2001. And they covered it up. So our government is compromised. They're not on our side. They were hiding the truth from you. That is indisputable now. And our media currently, as we sit, is also part of the cover-up. So on the Young Turks and on TYT as a network, we're never gonna let you down. We're gonna give you the honest truth, no matter what people say about us, no matter what the rest of the news media is doing, we're gonna give you the best we got and be honest with you no matter what. So these are two real emails in the Epstein files on the Justice Department website. You could look it up yourself. And if you're not asking questions about 9/11 after this, well, you're the kind of sap that corrupt people inside the US government and potentially inside the Israeli government love. Do not let them program you. Do not let them make you bend a knee and stop asking questions. Americans have to get together and fight back politically and get our government back.
Kofi, follow me.